She pressed both hands flat against the wooden gate and refused to fall. Her knees were shaking. Her dress was soaked through from the rain. The suitcase in her right hand had split at the seam somewhere between the train station and this stretch of Wyoming dirt, and she was holding it together with her fingers, white-knuckled, like if she let go of that, she would let go of everything. She had not eaten since the day before. She had not slept in 2. And the man standing on the other side of that gate, the man she had traveled 900 miles to marry, was looking at her, the way people look at something broken that they are not sure is worth fixing. "Please," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "Just give me a place to sleep." That is where this story begins. And if you have ever been the person in that doorway, if you have ever had to beg for something that should have been given freely, if you have ever had to prove your worth to someone who had already decided what you were, then stay with me. Because this story is for you. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And when you finish watching, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that gate. Let's go back to Clara. The train had been 3 hours late, which meant Clara Whitfield arrived in Red Willow, Wyoming, in the wrong light entirely. She had imagined it differently. She had spent the better part of 9 days on that train, imagining it, rehearsing it, almost the way a person rehearses a conversation they are terrified of having. She had imagined afternoon sun, golden and forgiving. She had imagined herself stepping down from the platform car, looking at least somewhat composed, her dress, shaken out, her hair pinned back properly, her face holding something close to calm. Instead, she stepped into the beginning of a storm. The sky over Red Willow had gone the color of a week-old bruise, all purple and sickly green along the edges, and the wind was already carrying that wet metallic smell. That means rain is not coming. Rain is already here, just hasn't reached the ground yet. The platform was nearly empty. A station master with tobacco-stained teeth glanced at her once and looked away. A woman in a respectable brown traveling coat hurried past without acknowledgement. A boy of about 12 leaned against the depot wall, watching her with the frank, unself-conscious curiosity that only children and the very old still permit themselves. Clara stood on that platform with her suitcase in her right hand and a folded letter in her left, and she took one full breath and she told herself what she had been telling herself for the better part of 3 months. "You have survived worse than this. Keep moving." The letter was from Nathan Cole. It had arrived at the boarding house in Wichita 7 weeks prior, responding to the notice she had placed in the matrimonial register. The notice had been simple because Clara had never been a woman who put more words to a thing than it required. Widow 29, experienced in farm management and household accounts. Seeks honest arrangement with working man of good character. Not seeking charity. Seeking a chance. Nathan's reply had been equally straightforward, and she had respected him for it before she had ever laid eyes on him. He had written in handwriting that was careful, but unpracticed. The handwriting of a man who used his hands for things other than letters, that he had a working cattle ranch outside Red Willow, that he was raising 2 younger siblings ages 14 and 11, and that he was not in a position to offer a grand life, but could offer honest work, a fair wage, and a room of her own, while they determined whether a permanent arrangement suited them both. He had said plainly that he required someone capable, not someone decorative. He had not promised romance. He had not promised ease. Clara had read that letter 4 times before she folded it back into the envelope. Then she had written back and said yes. That had been 7 weeks ago, and a great deal had changed in 7 weeks, none of it in any direction that could be called good. The boarding house she had been living in had been surviving. In really the distinction mattered was run by a widow named Mrs. Garfield, who had the face of a woman who had once been kind, and the eyes of a woman who no longer had the resources for it. Clara had been 3 weeks behind on her board. Mrs. Garfield had given her 1 final week. When Nathan's letter had arrived with the date and time to meet him at the Red Willow station, Clara had spent the last of her money on a train ticket and packed what remained of her possessions into 1 suitcase, the same suitcase she was currently holding together with her bare hands in the growing dark of a Wyoming pre-storm, and she had not looked back. There was nothing behind her to look back at. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 14 months. He had been a good man, a genuinely good man, which she understood was rarer than most people admitted, and he had died of a fever that took him in 11 days, which was the particular cruelty of fever, the speed of it. No time to prepare, no time to say the things that needed saying. He had left debts she hadn't known about. The farm they'd built together had gone to settle them. Her family, her father, her 2 brothers, had offered what they called help, and what amounted to a room in her father's house in exchange for unpaid labor and the silent understanding that she was a burden who ought to be grateful for the roof. She had lasted 3 months in that house before she understood that staying there would cost her something she could not afford to lose. So she had left. She had found the boarding house. She had found work copying letters for a dry goods merchant for $3 a week, which was barely enough to eat and nowhere near enough to save. And she had placed the notice in the matrimonial register because it was the only door left that still had any light under it. Now she was standing on a train platform in a town she had never seen, in a state she had never visited in. Weather that was about to become actively hostile, holding a letter with an address written on it and a suitcase that was failing her, and she was going to walk to Nathan Cole's ranch because she had spent her last coin on a wagon-borne delivery of her single trunk, which had been sent ahead 3 days prior, and she could not afford a ride. She asked the boy leaning against the depot wall how far the Cole ranch was from town. "About 2 miles, the boy said, studying her with that same frank gaze. "You the mail-order bride?" Clara looked at him steadily. "I am a woman who has made a business arrangement with Mr. Nathan Cole, yes." The boy seemed to find this answer more interesting than the simpler one. "He's been acting strange all week," the boy offered, apparently as a form of helpful information. "Real quiet. More than usual, I mean. And he's already real quiet." "Thank you," Clara said, and picked up her suitcase with both hands and walked. The rain started about a quarter mile outside of town. Not a gentle rain, not the kind that builds slowly enough to give you time to find shelter. The kind that simply begins all at once, like a decision that's been made without consultation. Clara had no coat that was adequate for it. Her dress gray wool, her best remaining dress, soaked through in minutes. The road, such as it was, turned from packed dirt to slick mud that grabbed at her boots and made every step a small negotiation. The suitcase already compromised, let go entirely at the handle seam, about a mile in, and she had to stop and reorganize her grip, holding the body of it against her side with one arm, which meant she was walking lopsided in the rain, with her good dress ruined, and her hair coming down from its pins, and still a mile to go. She did not cry. She had learned in the last 14 months that crying was a resource like any other, that it cost something every time, and that there were situations where the expenditure was simply not practical. This was one of those situations. She set her jaw and walked. She found the Cole Ranch gate exactly where the letter had described it. 3rd drive past the creek crossing iron gate, with the C-bar brand worked into the top bar. She stood in front of it for a long moment, rain still coming down, and she let herself feel for just that moment all of it. The exhaustion, the fear, the grief that never fully went away, no matter how much practical living she stacked on top of it. She felt it all, and then she set it down, the way you set down something heavy when you finally reach the place you've been carrying it to. Then she pushed the gate open and walked up the drive. Nathan Cole was standing on the porch. She had not expected him to be watching for her. She was late after all. The train had been late and he could not have known, but he was there, and he had clearly been there for some time, because his shoulders had the set of a man who has been standing in one place long enough for standing to become a decision renewed rather than one simply made. He was taller than she had imagined, broader through the shoulders. He had dark hair and a face that looked like it had spent years taking weather without complaint, which was to say, it was lined in ways that made it more interesting than it might have been at 20. He was not what she would have called a comfortable-looking man. He was what she would have called capable, which she had learned at 29 to value considerably more. He came down the porch steps when he saw her, which she had not expected either. He stopped about 6 feet away and looked at her, the way she had feared someone would look at her, taking in the soaked dress, the ruined suitcase, the hair coming down, the general comprehensive evidence that she was a woman who had been thoroughly undone by the last hour and possibly the last year. She met his gaze and did not look away and did not apologize for what he was seeing. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Cole," she said. There was a pause. Rain came down. "Train was late," she said. I know, he said. "I sent the boy to check. He came back and said you'd already gone. I couldn't afford a wagon." He absorbed this without visible judgment. "You walked the whole way." It wasn't so far. He looked at her for another long moment, and she could not fully read what was in that look. She was a perceptive woman, had always been. It was one of the things that had made her useful on her father's farm and on Thomas's farm, and that had never once made her life any easier, but she could see that he was recalibrating something. Whatever he had expected, she was not it. She had been afraid of that. She had been afraid of what would happen when the man on the other side of the arrangement looked at the actual woman and found her different from the version he had constructed in his head. "Please," she said, and the word came out before she had decided to say. It came out with more of what was underneath it than she had meant to let show. "I don't need promises. I don't need luxury. I know what this is. I know what I agreed to. Just give me a place to sleep tonight. Let me work. Let me prove I'm worth the arrangement." Nathan Cole looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Come inside." He reached out and took the failing suitcase from her without asking. And that small act, the simple, practical taking of it, the not making a ceremony of it, was the first thing he did that made her trust him. She followed him up the porch steps and through the front door and into a house that told her a great deal in the first 30 seconds of being inside it. It was not a comfortable house. It was a functional house, a house that had been managed rather than tended, everything in the right place, but none of it softened the way houses get when there is no one in them who has the time or the energy to put softness into them. There were dishes drying on the rack that had been stacked by someone who cared about the dishes being dry, but not particularly about the visual presentation of the drying. There was a coat hanging on a hook near the door that was child-sized, which accounted for the younger siblings. There were books on a shelf, not many, but present, which she noted. There was a lamp burning on the table, because the storm had darkened everything ahead of its time. "My sister and brother are at the neighbors for the night," Nathan said, setting her suitcase down near the wall. He did not offer to take her wet coat because she was not wearing one. "I thought it was better to give the introductions some room." "That was considerate," Clara said. "Didn't know how you'd be," he said plainly. "Didn't know how I'd be either." She looked at him. There was something she respected in that kind of honesty, the kind that didn't dress itself up. "Well," she said, "how am I?" Nathan Cole looked at her, this woman standing in his kitchen in a ruined dress with her hair coming down, who had walked 2 miles in a Wyoming rainstorm, rather than admit she had no money for a wagon, who had looked at him straight when she begged and not looked away. And he said, "Not what I expected." "Is that good or bad?" I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Don't know yet. I'll get you some dry things. My mother's clothes are still here. It's not—" He stopped. "They're clean," he said instead. "Thank you," Clara said. He brought her a dress and a wool shawl and pointed her to a room where she could change, and when she came back to the kitchen, he had put a plate of food on the table without asking whether she was hungry, which she respected on a level that was almost physical, the relief of not being made to ask for the basic things. She sat down and ate, and he sat across from her with coffee, and they were quiet for a while, the rain coming down outside, the lamp burning between them. "I need to tell you something," Clara said when she had eaten enough to think clearly. Nathan looked at her over his coffee cup. "I know what a mail-order arrangement is," she said, "and I know what people assume about women who enter into them. I'm not going to pretend I'm not here because I had no other choices. I am. But I want you to understand that I'm not here because I want someone to take care of me. I am here because I have skills that are useful to a working ranch, and I need a situation that will allow me to use them. If that's what this arrangement can be, then I believe it can work for both of us. If you've decided already that it can't, I'd rather know tonight than after I've—" She stopped. "I'd rather know tonight." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What kind of skills?" And there it was. The question she had been waiting to be asked for 14 months, and no one had thought to ask. Farm management, she said. Specifically livestock and land records. Before I married Thomas, I spent 6 years working my father's operation with him. He had 700 acres and 140 head of cattle. I kept the books managed, the breeding records, handled the water rights documentation, and helped develop the rotation schedule that took his herd from 140 head to over 230 in 4 years. I know soil assessment. I know how to read cattle health markers. I know how to analyze a record set and find where a ranch is bleeding slowly so it doesn't look like a crisis until it's too late to stop one. Nathan was very still. I didn't put that in my notice, she said, because I've learned that people don't generally believe it. Why not? She looked at him steadily. Because I'm a woman, and because I was asking for help, and people have decided that someone asking for help doesn't have anything to offer. The rain came down. The lamp burned. Nathan Cole put his coffee cup on the table and looked at her for a long time, and Clara let him look because she was tired of hiding the things about herself that were actually worth seeing. The ranch is struggling, he said finally. I suspected as much, she said. 3 years running under what my father built it to. Cattle numbers are down. The debt is manageable but only just. And I can't... He stopped and started again. I can't find where it's going wrong. It started after the winter of '84. Before that we were steady. Since then, every year a little worse. I've checked everything I know to check. Have you still got your father's records? Clara asked. Yeah, going back to when he started the place. May I look at them? He studied her. Why? Because what you're describing, slow consistent decline without an identifiable cause, usually means something is being missed. Not that something catastrophic has happened. The catastrophic things make themselves visible. It's the slow things that require looking. Another long silence. Outside something, a branch probably hit the side of the house and made both of them glance toward the window and then back to each other. I'll show you the records in the morning, Nathan said. Thank you, Clara said. Don't thank me yet. You might not find anything. I might not, she agreed. But I'll know a great deal more than I know now, and that's always worth something. The next morning arrived gray and washed clean after the night's rain, and with it came the 2 youngest Cole children delivered back from the neighbors by a wagon that Clara heard pulling up while she was helping set out plates for breakfast. The girl came in first. Her name was May, and she was 14, and she had her brother's dark hair and a quality of watchfulness that Clara recognized immediately, the quality you develop when you've spent time being the most responsible person in a room that needed one. May stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Clara with a measuring look that a woman of 40 might have been proud of. You're the bride, May said. I am a woman your brother is considering an arrangement with, Clara said. My name is Clara Whitfield. He said you'd be here when we got back. May came fully into the kitchen, set her things down, and glanced at the plates. You made breakfast. I hope that's all right. I didn't want to presume, but I was up early and it seemed... It's fine, May said. No one makes breakfast around here except me, and I don't always have time before school. She paused. Are you a good cook? I'm a competent cook, Clara said. Not a particularly inspired one. May almost smiled. That's an honest answer. The boy was Eli, 11 years old, with a gap where his front left tooth had recently been, and a manner of coming into a room that suggested he was always slightly in motion, even when technically standing still. He shook Clara's hand when May prompted him to eat his breakfast at a pace that suggested he regarded meals primarily as obstacles between himself and whatever he wanted to be doing, and asked Clara within the first 5 minutes whether she knew how to ride. Yes, Clara said. Well, Eli said, seemingly satisfied, and went back to his eggs. Nathan came in from the barn while she was washing dishes, and she heard him speak quietly with May in the other room, too low for her to catch the words. And then May said at a more normal volume, She seems all right. And Nathan said something else low, and May said, I'm just saying she seems all right, that's all. Clara kept washing dishes and did not acknowledge that she had heard any of it. After the children left for school, Nathan brought her to his study, a small room at the back of the house that held a desk, a chair, a second chair that had clearly been brought in recently, and 3 wooden crates of documents and ledgers that filled 2 walls and most of Clara's immediate horizon. She looked at them for a moment. "Your father kept everything," she said. "He kept everything." Nathan confirmed in a tone that suggested this had not always been easy to appreciate. "Good," Clara said. "That's very good. Where do we start?" They started with the most recent years and worked backward. Nathan pulled ledgers, and Clara sat at the desk and went through them page by page, while Nathan answered her questions, of which there were many. She asked about the water source. She asked about the grazing rotation. She asked about where he purchased his feed supplements in the lean months and from whom. She asked about the cattle sales who bought from him, at what prices, whether those prices had changed. She asked about the neighboring properties who owned what, which had changed hands in the last 5 years. Nathan answered all of it. He was not a man who talked easily, she was learning, but he was a man who answered questions honestly and fully when he trusted that they were asked in good faith, and she thought that was probably the more useful quality of the two. Halfway through the morning, she found something. It was in the water records, not in Nathan's records, but in the older ones, his father's from 1881 and 1882. She found the source assessment his father had filed with the county, the seasonal flow measurements, the estimates. And then she looked at the more recent records, what Nathan had filed for the last 3 years, and she sat very still for a moment and looked at the numbers. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Nathan," he said from where he stood by the window. It was the first time he had asked her to use his given name, and she noted it. "Nathan." She did not look up from the ledger. "What is the creek crossing on your northern boundary, the one that feeds your secondary water supply?" "Dawson Creek, runs off the ridge about 2 miles north, comes through Harlan Beaumont's property before it hits mine." She looked up then. "Harlan Beaumont, neighboring ranch owner. His property runs along my northern and eastern fences. His family bought in about 6 years back." Nathan's voice had shifted slightly, something careful coming into it. "Why?" "I want to see your father's property map," Clara said, "and your own survey if you have one. And then I want to ride that northern fence line. Today. If you can spare the time." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet," she said, which was true, but was also not the whole truth. What she had found was a discrepancy. What she suspected was something considerably worse than a discrepancy. But she had learned painfully more than once that suspicions stated before they were confirmed had a way of making the person who stated them look foolish, and she could not afford to look foolish here. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Let me see the map first," she said, "and then I'll tell you what I'm looking for." They rode with the fence line that afternoon. Nathan on a gray horse that suited him, solid, unhurried, reliable looking, and Clara on a bay mare that May had helped her saddle without making a point of helping her saddle it, which she appreciated. The sky had cleared after the morning's rain, and the light was good, and Clara was grateful for the light. At the northern fence, she stopped and got down from the mare and walked the ground carefully, and Nathan watched her without saying anything, which she appreciated even more than the good light. She found what she was looking for, about 300 yards along the fence, or rather, she found the absence of what should have been there. "The creek used to run here," she said. "What?" She pointed. "Your father's map shows Dawson Creek running along this fence line crossing onto your property at 2 points. Do you see where the drainage pattern is in this ground? The way the soil is structured here and here." She moved, showing him. "This ground carried water regularly for years, probably for as long as anyone has been using this land, but the water isn't here now." Nathan was quiet. He got down from the gray horse and walked to where she was standing and looked at the ground. "I've been over this fence 100 times, he said. "When did it change?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, "Winter of '84, he said. "Bad freeze. Thought the creek just shifted in the thaw." "Creeks don't usually shift 300 yards on their own," Clara said. "And they don't usually shift exactly to the edge of someone else's property line." She watched him take that in. She watched his face go through several things. Disbelief resistance, the slow, uncomfortable arrival at a possibility he did not want to consider. "Beaumont," he said. "I want to confirm it before we say anything," Clara said. "I need to see the county water rights records for his property for the last 6 years. And I want to look at his fence line from the public road. I can do that without trespassing. Can you take me to the county clerk's office tomorrow?" Nathan looked at her. The afternoon light was behind her, and he was looking at her the way she had noticed him. Beginning to look at her, not with the guarded assessment of the first night, but with something more careful and more direct. The look of a man who is updating what he knows to include information that doesn't fit what he thought he knew. "You think Beaumont's been diverting my water," he said. "I think someone's been diverting your water," she said. "I think the timing corresponds with when Beaumont acquired that property. I think the pattern of your losses, cattle health decline, graze quality dropping, is consistent with a reduced water access rather than any fault in your land or your management. And I think the only way to know for certain is to look at the records." She paused. "But I could be wrong. I want you to know that. I've found a pattern that concerns me. Patterns can deceive." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father tried to tell me something was wrong before he died. He said the land felt different on the north side, that something had changed. I thought he was just—" He stopped. "He was sick by then. I thought he was confused." Clara did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would be equal to that particular silence. "He wasn't confused," Nathan said. "No," Clara said gently. "I don't think he was." They rode back to the ranch in the fading afternoon, and Clara turned the numbers over in her mind the whole way home, laying them out and looking at them, rearranging them, testing them against each other, the way she had learned to do in the years when she was the person who kept her father's operation from going under through 3 years of drought and 1 year of market collapse that would have broken a man who was watching less carefully. She had learned in those years that the land always left records, that the truth of what happened to a piece of ground was written in it, in the drainage and the soil and the animal health and the yield, if you knew how to read it. Her father had taught her how to read it. He had not done it to be kind. He had done it because he needed someone to do the work, and she was there and willing. But the gift of it had outlasted everything else he had given her because it lived in her and could not be taken away, not by death or debt or a boarding house in Wichita. May was setting the supper table when they came in, and she looked up at Clara's face and then at Nathan's and clearly read something in both of them because she asked no questions, which was unusual for May. Over supper, Eli told a long and detailed story about something that had happened at school involving a rope, a fence post, and the teacher's hat, and the telling of it seemed to ease something in the room. The way children's stories sometimes do. They give the adults permission to let their faces do something other than what they've been doing all day. After supper, after the children had gone to bed, Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Clara and sat down across from her, and she thought of the first night, how different this felt from the first night, how much had shifted in the space of a single day. "If you're right," he said, "if Beaumont has been doing this, then you have grounds for a claim," Clara said. "Water rights are documented with the county. If his diversion is documented, and if it was done improperly, without the necessary filings, which a diversion of that kind almost certainly would be, then you have a legal case. But more than that, you have a case before the community. People care about water rights out here. They understand what it means." "He's liked," Nathan said. "In town. He does things for people, lends money sometimes." Clara looked at him steadily. "I know what that kind of liked looks like," she said. "I grew up watching it. The man who does the visible things, the charitable things, the things that go in the column where people remember. And behind that, something else. It doesn't make him impossible to face. It makes it necessary to bring evidence rather than accusation." Nathan was quiet. Then, "You said you could be wrong." "I could be wrong," she confirmed. "But I've been doing this long enough to know when a pattern is a coincidence and when it isn't. This doesn't feel like a coincidence." "No," Nathan said. "It doesn't." He looked at his coffee cup. Outside, the Wyoming night had settled in quiet and enormous. The kind of quiet that makes the things inside a lit room feel very specific and deliberate. The lamp, the table, the 2 cups of coffee, the 2 people sitting across from each other who had been strangers 3 days ago and were something less simple than that now. "Why didn't you put any of this in your notice?" he asked. "What you know, what you can do." Clara was quiet for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the surface of it. "Because I've learned that when a woman asks for help, people decide that's all she is. The asking. And everything else about her gets organized around that one fact. She's a woman who needed help. Whatever else she knows or can do or has survived gets filed under that." She looked up. "I didn't think anyone would believe it. I thought if I led with it, it would sound like a woman trying too hard to justify herself, and it would make everything worse." "And if someone had asked," Nathan said. "You asked," she said. "Last night. You're the first person who asked." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically. Nathan Cole was not a man who did anything dramatically, but something moved through his expression, quiet and serious. The way water moves under ice, present even when you can't see the surface of it. "I should have asked sooner," he said. "You didn't know to," she said. "Neither did I really. I'd learned to lead with the small version of myself because the large version made people uncomfortable." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say that. It was more truth than the moment required, and she had spent so long rationing her truth that this sudden surfacing of it surprised her almost as much as it surprised him. But Nathan didn't look uncomfortable. He looked like a man receiving information he had needed for some time and hadn't known he was missing. "Tomorrow," he said. "County clerk. We'll look at the records." "Yes," she said. "And if the records show what you think they show, then we figure out the next step together," she said. "That's how this works. You know this land and these people. I know how to read what's written in the records. Neither of those things is enough on its own." Nathan Cole nodded slowly. It was the first time she thought that she had said the word together in a conversation that hadn't felt like a pretense. She finished her coffee and said goodnight and went to the room that was hers. The room she had been given without strings, without conditions, beyond the ones she'd agreed to, which were the only kind she trusted, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time before she lay down. She thought about the water. She thought about the numbers. She thought about a man who kept his father's records going back 20 years, and who asked questions when he didn't know the answer, and who had taken a failing suitcase out of her hands in the rain without making a ceremony of it. She thought about the fact that she had told him the large version of herself, and he had not looked uncomfortable. She thought about how long it had been since she had been in a room that felt like it might eventually become something she was allowed to call home. She did not know yet if this ranch would save her. She was beginning to wonder if it was possible that she might save it first. The county clerk's office in Red Willow smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco, and the particular kind of dust that settles into rooms where important things are kept and rarely disturbed. Clara walked in behind Nathan and immediately felt the shift in the room. The clerk, a wiry man in his 50s named Mr. Aldous Finch, looked up from his desk saw. Nathan gave a polite nod and then looked at Clara and gave her a different kind of look entirely. The kind that catalogs and dismisses in the same motion. "Nathan Cole," Finch said. "What brings you in?" "Water rights records," Nathan said. "My property and the Beaumont parcel to the north, going back to 1880. Finch's eyebrows moved. "That's a fair bit of pulling." "We've got time," Nathan said. Finch glanced at Clara again. "This your—" He paused in a way that was not accidental. "Guest." "This is Clara Whitfield," Nathan said. "She's helping me review the records." "She familiar with water rights documentation?" "She is," Clara said pleasantly before Nathan could answer. "Shall we start with the original survey filings, or the annual flow assessments?" "I've found the flow assessments tend to be more useful when you're looking for a pattern of change, but it depends on how complete your records are." Finch stared at her. Nathan almost smiled. She saw it at the edge of his mouth, and then it was gone. "I'll pull the boxes," Finch said. He pulled the boxes, and Clara sat at the long table in the back of the clerk's office and opened the first of them, and she went to work. It took her 2 hours. Nathan sat across from her, and she handed him documents as she finished with them, and he read what she told him to read and asked questions when he had them, and she answered the questions, and that was how they worked. Like two people who had been doing this for years rather than 2 days, which she noticed and thought about briefly before she returned her full attention to the records, because the records were saying something, and what they were saying was making her jaw tight. Finch brought them coffee without being asked, somewhere in the middle of the second hour, which she thought meant he had either decided she was legitimate, or he was curious enough about what she was finding to want to keep them talking. Either way, she accepted the coffee and thanked him without looking up from the page she was reading. The pattern laid out in full was worse than she had suspected. In 1880, Dawson Creek had 2 documented crossing points onto the Cole property, both filed and recorded with the county, both with established flow measurements that Nathan's father had updated annually. Careful and consistent, the records of a man who understood that water was the thing a ranch was built on, and water rights were the thing that protected that. The flow measurements for those 2 crossings showed a healthy, stable creek, not dramatic, but reliable, the kind of reliable that a cattle operation could plan around. In 1883, a man named Gerald Beaumont, Harlan's father, had purchased the ridge parcel to the north. The purchase was recorded. The water rights associated with the parcel were recorded. What was also recorded, though, recorded quietly in a supplemental filing that had been added to a larger document. About irrigation improvements was a description of drainage modification works, completed in the spring of 1884. Drainage modification works. Clara read the description 3 times. It was written in the careful, bureaucratic language of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how to describe it in a way that would not immediately alarm anyone who skimmed it. The modifications as described involved rerouting of seasonal overflow channels to prevent spring flooding on the northern parcel, which was, if you read it quickly and didn't know what you were looking at, an entirely reasonable thing to do. If you read it slowly and you did know what you were looking at, it was a description of how to take a creek off its natural course and redirect it 90 degrees to the east away from the property line. It had followed for 20 years without filing for the water rights change that such a redirection legally required. Clara set the document down on the table and pressed her fingertips flat against it and took one steady breath. "Nathan," she said. He looked up from the deed he'd been reading. "Come look at this." He came around the table and stood beside her and read what she pointed to, and she watched him read it. Watched his face go through the slow, specific process of understanding something that reorders the story you have been telling yourself about your own life. "Drainage modification works," he said very quietly. "Filed as a farming improvement. No water rights change requested. No notification to adjacent property owners, which is legally required when a modification affects established crossing points." Clara kept her voice even. "The notification requirement is right here." She slid another document in front of him. "Your father would have had to be notified. He wasn't. Which means either the clerk who processed this didn't catch it, or someone made sure it was filed in a way that made it easy not to catch." Nathan straightened up slowly. He looked at the wall for a moment. 6 years, he said. 6 years of reduced water access on your northern grazing section, Clara said. Which is, she pulled the Cole property map between them. Your primary summer grazing rotation. The section your father expanded to in 1879 when he increased the herd. When he increased the herd, Nathan repeated. Which is why our cattle numbers have been falling every year since. Not because... He stopped. "I thought I was mismanaging. I thought I had missed something my father knew that I didn't." "You didn't miss anything," Clara said. "Someone moved the creek." The silence that followed that sentence was the particular kind of silence that comes when something that has been wrong for a long time is finally named. It had weight to it, that silence. It had the quality of a thing settling. Aldous Finch had drifted to the far end of the room during their review, and Clara had noticed he was not really doing anything over there, which meant he was listening. She did not lower her voice. She wanted him to listen. A clerk who processed county records was exactly the kind of witness you needed when you were about to say what she was about to say. "This filing was incomplete and legally deficient," she said at a volume that carried. The Beaumont parcel's drainage modification affected documented water access on the Cole property without proper notification or rights adjustment. That is a violation of Wyoming territorial water law. The Cole Ranch has been operating with reduced water access for 6 years based on an unauthorized modification, and no one in this office flagged it. Finch came back to the table. His face had gone through several things while she was speaking, and what it had arrived at was something between discomfort and professional alarm. Now, I don't know that anyone intentionally— "I'm not making a claim about intent right now," Clara said. "I'm making a claim about the record. The record shows what it shows. What I'm asking is whether the county has a process for filing a correction notice when an error of this kind is identified." Finch looked at Nathan, then back at Clara, then at the documents on the table. "There's a process," he said. "Good," Clara said. "We'd like to begin it." They left the clerk's office an hour later with 3 copied documents, copies that Finch had made himself with a thoroughness that Clara thought suggested he was covering himself as much as helping them, which was fine. The copies existed, that was what mattered. Nathan didn't say anything until they were outside, and then what he said was, "You handled that room like you've done it before." "I have done it before," Clara said. "My father's neighbor in Georgia rerouted a drainage channel in 1876. I was 23. My father didn't know how to fight it. I spent 4 months learning how." She paused. "He didn't listen to most of what I found, but I learned how to find it." Nathan looked at her. "He didn't listen." "He listened enough," she said. "Eventually. But it took time, and it cost time we didn't have, and that's why I—" She stopped. "Why you learned to lead with the small version," Nathan said. She hadn't realized she'd said that phrase last night in the kitchen over coffee, and she hadn't realized it was the kind of phrase that stayed with a person. But apparently it was. Apparently it had. "Yes," she said. They rode back toward the ranch in silence that was not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has substance to it, that is doing work, rather than simply waiting for words to fill it. And that was when they passed Harlan Beaumont's front gate. How was there? Standing at it, as if he had known they would pass, as if the whole thing had been arranged, which was, Clara thought, probably giving him too much credit, but the effect was the same either way. Harlan Beaumont was a large man, broad and well-fed, with the kind of face that had been handsome 20 years ago, and was now simply imposing. And he had 2 hired men with him who stood a half step behind and to each side, in the way that men stand when they are being used as a statement. "Nathan Cole," Beaumont said, lifting a hand in a greeting that was more performance than warmth. "Don't see you on this road often." "Harlan," Nathan said. He had gone very still on the gray horse. Clara felt the stillness move through him like something hardening. Beaumont's eyes moved to Clara with an assessment that she recognized and did not react to. "This your new bride?" he asked with an intonation that made the word bride sound like something you might find at the bottom of a barrel. "This is Clara Whitfield," Nathan said. "Heard you sent off for a catalog woman," Beaumont said, conversationally, addressing Nathan, the way men sometimes talk about a woman in front of her to demonstrate that she is not truly present in the conversation. "Didn't know you were that set on it. Ranch trouble making you desperate." Clara had heard this kind of talk before, had developed over the years a response to it that was more effective than anger, which was the response it was designed to provoke. "Mr. Beaumont," she said pleasantly, turning her horse slightly toward his gate. "I've been reviewing water records at the county clerk's office this morning. You know Aldous Finch. I imagine he was very helpful. We found some interesting documentation about the drainage modifications on your northern parcel in 1884. I'm sure you're aware of the notification requirements under territorial water law for modifications affecting adjacent property crossing points." Beaumont's expression did not change, but something behind it did. She was good at seeing things behind things. "I don't know what you think you found," he said. "The filing is right there in the county record," Clara said. "It's been there for 6 years. These things have a way of becoming visible when someone takes the time to look for them." She smiled at him the way you smile at someone when you want them to know that you know, and that you are not afraid of them, knowing that you know. "I'm sure there's a straightforward explanation. We'll look forward to discussing it through the proper process." She turned her horse back to the road and did not look at him again. They rode perhaps a quarter mile before Nathan said, "That was deliberate." "Yes," Clara said. "You wanted him to know we'd been to the clerk." "I wanted him to know before he heard it from someone else and had time to prepare a narrative," she said. "Right now he knows what we found. He doesn't know exactly how much we can prove. That uncertainty is useful. Men who are accustomed to being in control of information tend to make decisions quickly when that control feels threatened, and quick decisions under pressure are not usually careful decisions." Nathan rode beside her for a long moment. "You're thinking about what he does next." "I'm always thinking about what comes next," Clara said. "That's the only way you stay ahead of it." What came next was faster than she had expected. The following morning, May came in from collecting the eggs with her face tight in a way Clara had learned meant something had already gone wrong before breakfast, and she set the egg basket on the table and said, "Mrs. Harding told her daughter, who told Eli at the fence, that Harlan Beaumont is saying Mr. Cole's new bride has been going around town making false accusations about him." Clara looked up from the accounts she had been reviewing at the kitchen table. Nathan's accounts, which he had given her access to 3 days ago, with a quietness that had moved her more than he probably knew. "Is that so?" she said. "He's saying she doesn't understand the records she's looking at." May put her hands on her hips in a gesture that was so precisely her brother's posture that Clara had to keep her expression neutral. "He's saying she's a woman who doesn't know what she's talking about, and Nathan should have known better than to trust a stranger with his business." "What else?" May hesitated. "He's saying he's going to speak to Judge Calloway about harassment, that you went to the clerk's office to make trouble." Clara set down her pencil. She was quiet for a moment, arranging the situation in her mind, the way she arranged a set of numbers, looking at the structure of it, what it revealed, what it was designed to conceal. "May," she said, "does your brother know yet?" "He's in the barn. I came to you first." Clara looked at her. 14 years old, this girl, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, and a mind that had been sharpened by necessity into something considerably more formidable than most people in Red Willow would bother to notice. "Why?" May didn't answer immediately. Then, "Because you're the one who'll know what to do." Something moved through Clara's chest, at that something she hadn't expected and didn't entirely know what to do with, so she filed it carefully and stood up and said, "Go get your brother, please." Nathan came in from the barn with hay still on his jacket and listened to what Clara had assembled from May's report. His face did what it did when he was angry, went very quiet and very still, which she had already learned was more serious than shouting would have been. "He's going to Judge Calloway," Nathan said. "He's going to try to control the story before we can tell it," Clara said. "Which means we need to tell it first." "How? Who in this town do people actually listen to?" she asked. "Not who they like. Who they trust," Nathan thought. "Doc Mercer. He's been here since before most families settled. Reverend Stills, if it's a moral question. And old Martha Granger. She's been on the water board since 1875. She knows every water rights dispute in this county." "Martha Granger," Clara said immediately. "That's where we start." "Martha doesn't warm to strangers." "I'm not planning to be a stranger," Clara said. "I'm planning to show her the documents." Martha Granger lived half a mile from town, in a house that looked from the outside like it had been argued into existence over several decades and had won. She was 71 years old, small and compact with white hair and the particular quality of attention that comes to people who have spent many years being the only one paying it. She opened her door at Nathan's knock and looked at Clara the way you look at something you have not yet decided the value of. "You're the Cole bride," she said. "I'm Clara Whitfield," Clara said. "I was hoping to show you some documents." "What kind of documents?" "The kind that explain where your neighboring creek went." Martha looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then she stepped back from the door and said, "Come in then." Clara spread the documents on Martha Granger's kitchen table, the copies from the county clerk, the original measurements from Nathan's father's records, the survey comparisons she had drawn herself, staying up past midnight the previous night with a candle and a straight edge, and the clear-eyed focus that had always come to her when a problem was finally fully defined. Martha Granger did not rush. She read everything. She asked 3 questions, good questions, precise questions. The questions of someone who knew the material, and Clara answered them fully. When Martha set the last document down, the room was quiet. "Drainage modification works," Martha said in a tone that did not leave any room for interpretation about what she thought of that phrase. "Filed as a farming improvement," Clara confirmed. "I've been on the water board for 11 years, Martha said. "This was never brought to us." "It should have been," Clara said, "which means either it was filed improperly on purpose or the process failed. Either way, the result is 6 years of unauthorized diversion. And the coal ranch suffering for it." Martha looked at Nathan. "Your father knew something was wrong. He told me. 3 years before he died, he told me the creek felt different." Nathan's jaw tightened. "He told me too. I didn't understand what he meant." "You were 28 and running a ranch alone with 2 children under your care," Martha said briskly. "You were doing your best with what you had." Then she looked at Clara. "You found all of this in 3 days." "I knew what to look for," Clara said. "Where'd you learn it?" "My father's operation in Georgia. 6 years, helping him manage land and water records. Then my late husband's farm." She kept her voice level. "I've been looking at this kind of documentation since I was 22. Martha drummed her fingers on the table once. "Harlan Beaumont is telling people you don't know what you're talking about." "I know," Clara said. "He's saying Nathan was foolish to trust a stranger." "I know that too." "And what do you say?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "I say the records say what they say, and I would welcome any examination of my analysis by anyone qualified to conduct it. I say if Mr. Beaumont has a counter-explanation for the discrepancy in those documents, I would like very much to hear it, because I have spent 3 days looking for one and haven't found it." She paused. "I'm not asking anyone to believe me because I'm asking them to. I'm asking them to look at the evidence." Martha Granger was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll call a water board meeting." Nathan looked up. "This week," Martha said. "You'll present what you've found. Beaumont will be notified. Everyone who needs to see these documents will see them." She looked at Clara. "Can you present this?" "Yes," Clara said. "Beaumont will come at you hard." "I expect he will. He's well liked in this town. He's done favors for people. He's the kind of man who makes sure people feel they owe him something before they ever need to." "I know the type," Clara said. Martha studied her. "I believe you do." She began gathering the documents back into a neat stack. "I'll have the meeting called for Thursday, 2 days. She handed the stack to Clara. "You keep these. You present them yourself." She looked at Nathan. "Your father was a good man, Nathan. He built that ranch honest, and he kept it honest. It's not right what's been happening to it." Then finally, a small, extremely precise smile crossed her face. "I'm glad you've got someone who can read. The town of Red Willow found out about the water board meeting. The way towns find out about everything, quickly, incompletely, and with a great deal of editorial addition from everyone who passed the story along." By Tuesday afternoon, the version circulating at Harker's General Store held that Nathan Cole's mail-order bride had discovered a conspiracy going back to the founding of the territory and was planning to sue every rancher north of the ridge. By Tuesday evening, the version at the saloon had somehow acquired a detail about buried documents and a dead surveyor that Clara was fairly certain she had not included in any conversation she had actually participated in. What she did participate in was the hardware store on Tuesday morning. She and Nathan had gone in to purchase fencing wire. The northern fence line needed work, and Clara had added it to the list of things that needed doing. The list that had gotten considerably longer as she learned more about the state of the ranch, and 3 men had been standing at the counter when they came in. She had not recognized any of them, but they had clearly recognized her, and the conversation they'd been having had stopped the moment she walked through the door. She had gone directly to the counter and told the proprietor what they needed, and while he was pulling the order together, one of the 3 men said behind her, at a volume carefully calculated to be audible without being direct, "Here Beaumont's not too pleased about all this record business." None of the 3 men were speaking to her. They were speaking to each other and the wall and possibly the ceiling. Clara turned around. "I expect he isn't," she said pleasantly. The man, heavy-set in his 40s, wearing a rancher's jacket, looked at her with the particular surprise of someone who had been heard doing something they didn't think would be heard. "Didn't mean to." "I know," Clara said. "Can I ask you something?" He looked uncertain. "Suppose." "Did you know that Dawson Creek used to cross the Cole property at 2 points before 1884? He frowned. "I heard something like that, maybe." "The creek crossing is documented in the county record going back to 1875, Clara said. "The water fed the north grazing section. After the drainage modification on the Beaumont property in 1884, which was filed without the required notification to adjacent landowners, the creek stopped crossing onto Cole land entirely. The cattle on that section have been losing condition for 6 years. The ranch has been losing money every year since. Not because of bad management." She looked at all three of them. "Because someone moved the water." The hardware store had gone very quiet. "I'm presenting the documentation to the water board Thursday," Clara said. "Anyone who wants to look at the records before then is welcome to come to the Cole Ranch. I'll show them what I found." She turned back to the counter. "We'll take the wire, please." Outside, Nathan said, "You're building witnesses." "I'm giving people information before Beaumont can give them a different version of it," Clara said. "Every person in this town who looks at those records before Thursday is one less person he can convince that what I found isn't real. He has a lot of influence." "Influence works best in a vacuum," Clara said. "It doesn't work as well when the records are on the table." Wednesday arrived with a particular quality of tension that Clara felt in the posture of everyone she encountered in town. The kind of tension that precedes a known event, a community drawing breath before something that will change where people stand. She felt it in Nathan too, a tightness he controlled carefully, but could not entirely conceal, especially in the evenings when the day's work was done, and there was nothing to do but wait. Wednesday evening. They sat on the porch after the children were in bed, and it was Nathan who broke the silence first. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Clara said. "Are you afraid?" He was looking at the dark beyond the porch, the shapes of the land against the lesser dark of the sky. Of Thursday, of what Beaumont might do or say. Clara thought about it honestly, the way she had trained herself to think about things, not the answer she wanted to give, but the true one. "I'm afraid of being wrong," she said. "That's the fear that lives with me. That I've built a case on a pattern that's a coincidence after all. That I've brought this to Martha Granger and the water board, and put it in front of the whole town, and it turns out I missed something." She paused. "I'm not afraid of Beaumont. I've faced men who had more power than he does, and who were less honest about using it." Nathan turned to look at her. "And you trust what you found?" "I trust what the records show," she said. "Yes, I do." He was quiet. "Nathan," she said, "what are you afraid of?" He looked at her, and she had learned by now to read the particular quality of his silences, which ones were him thinking, and which were him deciding whether to speak what he had already thought. "That I waited too long," he said. "That if I'd looked harder, or asked the right questions earlier, my father would have known before he died that the ranch wasn't failing because of something he did wrong." The night pressed around them large and full of stars. "Your father didn't fail this ranch," Clara said quietly. "And neither did you. What happened to this ranch happened to it. There's a difference." She let that sit for a moment. "And Thursday, whatever happens Thursday, is not the end. It's the beginning of a reckoning that should have happened 6 years ago. You're not fighting to save something that was already lost. You're fighting to restore something that should never have been taken." Nathan looked at her for a long time. In the dark of the porch, with the ranch spread out behind them, and the work ahead of them still unmeasured. He looked at her the way he had on the northern fence line, updating, recalibrating, finding that she was more than the version of her he had started with. "You know," he said finally, "when I agreed to the arrangement, I thought I was making a practical decision." "Wasn't it?" Clara said. "It was," he said. "It just turned out to be practical in ways I didn't anticipate." And that she thought was as close as Nathan Cole was going to come to saying something that wasn't strictly practical, which was fine. She was a woman who had learned to value the things people showed you over the things they told you. and what he showed her in the drafting of it was enough. Thursday came. The water board met in the back room of the Red Willow Town Hall, which was also the room where the county used for tax disputes and the occasional coroner's inquest, and which had, as a result, the particular atmosphere of a place where things got decided whether people were ready for them to be decided or not. Clara had been in the room for 20 minutes before the meeting was called to order, arranging her documents on the table the board had assigned to her, the documents from the county clerk, her own analysis, the survey comparisons, Nathan's father's original flow measurements, laid side by side with the most recent filings, everything organized in the order she intended to present it, everything she might need findable within 3 seconds, because she had learned long ago that the person who fumbles for their papers in front of a hostile room has already lost half the argument before they open their mouth. The room had filled faster than she expected. Martha Granger had said the meeting would be open, and apparently Red Willow had taken that as an invitation, because by the time the board chairman called the room to order, there were no fewer than 40 people pressed into a space meant for 25. Clara recognized some of them, the man from the hardware store who had made the remark about Beaumont, 2 women from the general store who had watched her with open curiosity on Tuesday, Doc Mercer in the corner with his arms folded and his expression professionally neutral. She recognized the 3 members of the water board who sat at the front table with the particular posture of people who had not expected this level of public interest in a water rights procedural. She recognized Harlan Beaumont, who had arrived with his lawyer, a man from Cheyenne named Caldwell, well-dressed and deliberately unbothered-looking, who had sat up at the opposing table with the quiet competence of someone who had done this many times and expected to do it many more. She recognized Nathan standing at the wall to her left and May beside him. May, who had announced that morning at breakfast that she was coming and had looked at both adults in a way that made it clear this was not a request, and Eli, who had been left at a neighbor's but had apparently not stayed there because he appeared about 15 minutes into the gathering at the back of the room and caught Clara's eye and gave her a look of pure, uncomplicated solidarity that she felt somewhere considerably deeper than she had anticipated. The board chairman, a man named Horace Webb, who had the face of someone who preferred situations to stay simple and had long since accepted that they rarely did, called the meeting to order and explained the purpose of the gathering in 3 careful sentences, and then he looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "you've requested this review. You may present your findings." Clara stood up. The room went quiet, in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when they are deciding whether to take someone seriously. She had thought about how to begin this, and she had decided to begin with the simplest possible thing. The thing that did not require any expertise to understand the thing that was either true or it wasn't. Dawson Creek used to cross the Cole property at 2 documented points, she said. Those crossings are in the county record. They were filed by Robert Cole in 1875 and updated annually for 9 years. The most recent flow measurement in those records is from the spring of 1883. After that date, there are no more flow measurements for those crossings because as of the spring of 1884, the water stopped coming. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I'm going to show you why." She walked them through it, the way she had walked Nathan through it in the clerk's office, but cleaner, faster, stripped of the exploratory back and forth, because she had 3 days more certainty now and a room that she needed to move before it had time to find reasons to stop moving. She showed them the original survey. She showed them the flow records. She showed them the 1884 modification filing, put it on the table, and read the relevant section aloud, slowly enough that everyone in the room could follow it, and quick enough that no one's attention escaped. "Drainage modification works," she read. "Rerouting of seasonal overflow channels to prevent spring flooding on the northern parcel." She looked up. This filing describes a modification that, according to the property survey, redirected Dawson Creek approximately 300 yards east of its established course. That redirection removed the water from both documented Cole crossing points. The filing was processed as a farming improvement. No water rights change was filed. No notification was provided to adjacent landowners, which is required by territorial law when a modification affects established downstream access. She put the notification requirement statute on the table. She had copied it by hand from the territorial code, because she had learned that showing people the actual language of the law was more effective than summarizing it. The coal ranch has operated with unauthorized reduced water access for 6 years, she said. The northern grazing section, which depends on that water source, has shown consistent cattle health decline, corresponding to the period of reduced access. The ranch's annual output has fallen in a pattern consistent with chronic water shortage on that section, not with mismanagement or market conditions. She sat down. The room exhaled. Board member number 2. A woman named Ruth Halcott, who had the compact, deliberate manner of someone who took precision seriously, leaned forward. Miss Whitfield, you say no notification was provided. How do you know the notification wasn't filed separately and simply not in the records we have? I asked Mr. Finch to search the full file for the Beaumont parcel, Clara said. He found no notification document. I also asked Nathan Cole whether his father ever received a notification of this kind. He did not. Robert Cole's records, which he kept meticulously, include every county communication he received in 30 years of operation. There is no notification from 1884. There is no response to a notification from 1884. She paused. The absence is in two separate record sets. That's not a misfiling. That's an absence. Ruth Halcott wrote something down. That was good. Harlan Beaumont's lawyer rose. Caldwell was smooth. Clara had expected smooth. He had the practiced ease of a man who had spent years taking complicated situations and finding the sentence that made them simple enough to dismiss, and he deployed it immediately. The board should understand, Caldwell said, that what we have here is a preliminary analysis conducted by someone with no professional credentials and no legal standing in this matter. Miss Whitfield is not a surveyor. She is not an attorney. She is not a hydrologist. She is a woman who arrived in Red Willow 6 days ago and has spent that time reviewing documents she may not fully understand, drawing conclusions that serve the interests of the man she has a financial arrangement with. He smiled pleasantly. The board would be well advised to commission a proper professional survey before acting on the findings of someone with so obvious a bias. The room shifted. Clara felt it, the small collective adjusting of posture and attention that means people are recalibrating. That the easy confidence of a man in a good suit has done its work on the edges of the room. She stood up without being recognized. Webb said, Miss Whitfield. I'll be brief, she said. He nodded because she had said it with the tone of someone who meant it. Mr. Caldwell is correct that I am not a surveyor, she said. I am a woman who spent 6 years managing agricultural land records for a 700-acre operation and a further 3 years as a co-manager of a working cattle ranch. He is correct that I have a connection to Nathan Cole. He is correct that the board should commission a professional survey. In fact, I would welcome it because a professional survey will confirm what the existing county records already show. She picked up the modification filing. But I want to be clear about something. The question before this board today is not whether my analysis is correct. The question is whether this document, she held it up, was properly filed. That is a procedural question. It requires no expertise in hydrology. It requires the ability to read the statute which I have provided, and the ability to read the filing which I have also provided, and the ability to determine whether one satisfies the requirements of the other. She set the document back on the table. It does not, she said. That determination does not require my credentials. It requires a literate person and 15 minutes. The room was very quiet. Then, from the back, from the man in the rancher's jacket, the one from the hardware store, came a single flat, unambiguous statement. She's right about the creek. My father's property runs east of the coal line. He used to fish that creek crossing when he was a boy. Hasn't been water there since I was about 20. The room moved again. Differently this time. Caldwell's pleasantness did not shift exactly, but it recalibrated. She saw it happen, the invisible adjustment, the reassessment. And that was when Harlan Beaumont stood up. He had let his lawyer carry the opening, which was smart. Let the professional establish the frame before the principal engages. Keep the principal above the procedural fray. But something had shifted in the room that he had apparently decided required his personal weight. "I've been a neighbor to this territory for 6 years," Beaumont said, and his voice had the quality of a man who was accustomed to rooms listening to him. "I've employed men from this town. I've lent money to families who needed it when times were hard. I've contributed to this community in ways that have nothing to do with whatever is written in some old filing." He looked at Nathan. "And what I'm hearing today is that a woman who walked into Red Willow less than a week ago is making accusations about me based on a stack of documents she pulled together in 3 days." He turned to look at Clara directly, which he had not done before. "Are we really going to take the word of a mail-order bride over 6 years of good standing?" The room held its breath. Clara looked at him. She did not look away. She did not look at Nathan, or at Martha, or at the board. She looked at Harlan Beaumont, the way you look at a thing you have already fully accounted for. "Mr. Beaumont," she said quietly, "I am not asking anyone to take my word for anything. I am asking them to look at the records." She put her hand flat on the documents in front of her. "The records are not my word. The records are the county's word. They are your word, your own filing filed in your name describing what you did to that creek. I did not write them. I only found them." She held his gaze. "If you'd like to tell the board that the filing doesn't mean what it says, I would genuinely like to hear that explanation. I've been looking for one for 3 days." Beaumont's jaw tightened. "And as for who I am," Clara continued, and there was something in her voice now that had not been there before. Something that had been under the surface all week, held down by the discipline of the practical. "I am a woman who has been managing land and water records since I was 22 years old. I am a woman who kept a 700-acre operation solvent through 3 years of drought because I paid attention to things that other people didn't think were worth paying attention to. I am a woman who walked 2 miles in a rainstorm rather than ask anyone for more than I had earned." She did not raise her voice. "I am asking you to look at the records, Mr. Beaumont. Not because I am a bride or a woman or a stranger. Because the records are there and they say what they say, and all of the standing in this territory does not change what is written in the county's own filing." The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes after something true has been said in a room that needed to hear it. Beaumont sat down. Martha Granger from her seat at the board table said in a voice like dry timber, "I move that the board commission an independent survey of the watercourse in question and request a full compliance review of the 1884 modification filing." She looked at the other 2 board members. "Seconded," Ruth Halcott said, "seconded." Webb said, "The motion carries." And then something happened that Clara had not planned for and could not have anticipated. Doc Mercer uncrossed his arms. He had been standing in the corner for the entire proceeding, which was Clara had noted exactly where he would be positioned if he intended to observe without signaling his position until he had one. Now he walked to the front of the room with the deliberate, unhurried gait of a man who was very clear about what he was about to do. "Horace," he said to Chairman Webb, "before we close the formal portion, I want to put something into the record." Webb looked startled. "Evan, it'll take 2 minutes." Mercer turned to face the room. "I was the Cole family's physician for 11 years. I was Robert Cole's doctor when he died. In the last year of his life, Robert told me on 2 separate occasions that he believed something had changed about his North Water source. He said the cattle on that section were not right, and he couldn't find a reason for it. I told him it might be the natural variance of a dry year." He paused. "I told him that twice. I was wrong twice." He looked at Clara. "What this woman found in 3 days the rest of us, me included, failed to find in 6 years. That is not a comment on her credentials. That is a comment on what happens when someone bothers to look." He walked back to his corner. The room was completely still. Nathan at the wall had his hand pressed flat against the plaster beside him. Clara could see from where she sat, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of a man who is holding something very large, very carefully. Because if he lets himself feel the full size of it in a public room, he will not be able to remain as still as he needs to remain. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything because the room was full of people, and there was nothing to say that could be said in a room full of people, but the looking was enough. The meeting was adjourned. People filed out slowly, which is how rooms file out when they have more to process than their feet want to wait for. There were conversations happening in clusters. She could hear fragments. Beaumont's name, the creek, the filing. Did you know I heard my father used to say? And she sat at her table and organized her documents back into their stack with the same methodical care she had brought them in with, because the habit of orderly completion was one she did not abandon just because the hard part was over. Over, she thought. Except it wasn't over. It was the beginning of the formal process, which was different from the end of anything. Beaumont left with Caldwell without speaking to anyone on his way out, which she noted. Men who were accustomed to working the room on their way out and did not do it were men who were thinking hard about something. She filed that away. Martha Granger stopped beside her table on her way out. "Well," Martha said. "Well," Clara agreed. "You gave him the chance to explain himself," Martha said. "Publicly, he didn't take it." "No," Clara said. "That'll be remembered." Martha picked up one of the documents from the table, looked at it, set it back. "The survey will take 3 weeks, maybe 4. The compliance review will take longer. This is not finished." "I know," Clara said. "Beaumont has money, and he has lawyers, and he has 6 years of people feeling like they owe him something." "I know that too." Martha looked at her for a moment with those clear 71-year-old eyes. "Are you going to stay?" Clara looked up. "What?" "When this gets harder, and it will get harder before it gets easier, are you going to stay?" Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about the worn suitcase in the corner of the room that had been given to her without conditions. She thought about May saying, "You're the one who'll know what to do." She thought about Eli's look of uncomplicated solidarity from the back of the room. She thought about a man on a porch in the rain who had taken a failing suitcase out of her hands without making a ceremony of it. "Yes," she said. Martha nodded, once the nod of a woman who has been reading people for 71 years and has just confirmed a reading. "Good," she said, and left. Nathan came to the table when the room had cleared to just the two of them, and one of the board members gathering chairs at the far end. I didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the documents she was stacking, and then he picked up the one on top, his father's flow measurement from 1882, and looked at it, and she thought about what it must feel like to hold a piece of your father's handwriting and know finally what it was evidence of. "He knew," Nathan said. "He kept telling me. The last 2 years he kept saying the north section felt wrong. I thought he was confused by the illness." He set the paper down. "He wasn't confused." "No," Clara said softly. "He was right. And I didn't listen." "You were 28 years old, and you were watching your father die," Clara said. "And you were running a ranch and raising 2 children, and you were doing what a person does when they are surrounded by more than they can carry, which is, you put your head down and you carry it. That is not a failure. That is survival." She looked at him directly. "Your father would know the difference." Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I want to show you something." They rode out to the northern fence line in the hour before sunset, and Nathan stopped his horse at the same point where Clara had stopped 3 days ago. The ground that held the memory of water in its structure, the dip and drainage pattern that told the story of where the creek had been. He got down from the gray horse and walked about 20 feet east of where they'd stood before, and he crouched down in the tall grass and pushed it aside with his hands, and Clara got down from the bay mare and came to see what he had found. There was a stone marker. Old, nearly buried by grass growth, smoothed by weather until the letters were difficult but not impossible to read. R.C., 1875. Robert Cole. The year he had filed the water rights. "He put it here," Nathan said. "I forgot about it. I used to know every marker on this property. My father walked every fence line with me when I was a boy. I forgot this one." He sat back on his heels. "He put it right where the creek crossed, to mark it." Clara looked at the stone and then at Nathan's face, and she made no move to fill the silence, because some silences are not hers to fill. After a moment, Nathan said, "He built this ranch on that water, planned his whole operation around it. Everything he grew here started with knowing that water was reliable." He was quiet. "Beaumont took the water, but what he actually took was the thing my father built his whole plan around. Everything that came after the falling numbers, the debt, the years I spent thinking I was failing at something my father did right, all of it started here. Yes, Clara said. And you found it. The records found it, she said. I just knew how to read them. Nathan looked at her then, and it was the most unguarded she had seen his face. Not the controlled steadiness of the porch, not the careful neutrality of the clerk's office. Something that had been held back for a long time by the weight of practical necessity had moved to the surface, and he was letting it be there. Why? He said. She looked at him. Why what? Why did you come here really? Not the answer from the notice, not the practical answer. Why here? Why this? Clara was quiet for a moment. The grass moved around the stone marker in the last of the afternoon light. Because I have spent 3 years being invisible, she said. After Thomas died, being the woman who lost everything, the woman who needed help, the woman who people decided they already knew the whole story of before she said a word. She paused. I came here because you wrote a letter that said you needed someone capable. Not someone to be taken care of. Someone capable. And I thought... She stopped. Started again. I thought that maybe in a place that needed what I actually have, I might get to be the version of myself that's actually true. Nathan Cole looked at her across the grave of his father's water marker in the last light of a Wyoming afternoon and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, You are. 2 words. But they were the 2 words that landed in the specific empty place that 3 years of invisibility had worn in her, and they landed there with the quiet, settled weight of something that intended to stay. They rode home in the dark, and it was home that Clara thought of it as not the Cole Ranch, not the arrangement, but home. And she noted that with the same careful attention she gave to everything she was not yet sure she was allowed to have. The Survey Commission sent out a man named Prescott on the following Monday. Clara was out at the fence line when he arrived because she had intended to be. She had learned in her father's operation that the people who commissioned surveys got the most useful results when someone who understood what needed to be measured was present to point at it, and she had no intention of leaving a 4-week professional process to chance. Prescott was a compact, weathered man in his 50s who looked at the land the way she looked at records directly, without editorial, seeing what was there, rather than what he expected. He shook her hand when Nathan introduced her, which not every man in this territory had done, and he said, You're the one who found the original crossing points in the documentation. Yes, Clara said. Can you show me where you think the original course ran? Yes, she said. And she did. Prescott worked methodically for the first 2 days without saying much beyond technical clarifications, which Clara respected. On the 3rd day, he stopped in the late afternoon and said to no one in particular, and therefore to both of them, Somebody moved this creek. That's not natural variance. That's engineered. Nathan said, How can you tell? Because natural variance doesn't leave straight lines, Prescott said. He pointed. That embankment is modified. You can see the cut it's weathered over 6 years, but the angle is still there. Water doesn't cut like that on its own. Someone dug it. Clara looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the embankment. How long would it take to do this? Nathan asked. If you had the right equipment and enough men, Prescott considered. A week, maybe 2. You'd want to do it in winter when the ground is workable and the water level is low, and when the neighboring property owner is less likely to be out at the fence line regularly. He paused. Winter of 83 to 84, I'd guess. Maybe early spring of 84. That's when Beaumont's father completed the improvements, Clara said, according to the filing. Well, Prescott said, and the single word contained a great deal. Then I'd say your filing description and your ground evidence are consistent. Clara had been holding herself still for 4 days, holding the part of herself that wanted to be certain to a strict standard of evidence before it was, and now something gave way, just slightly, not dramatically, not in any way that would show in a room full of people, but she felt it, the shift from I believe this to I know this, the particular relief of a thing confirmed. She pressed her hands against her thighs and breathed once and looked at the embankment and let herself have it for 1 full second. Then she said, When can you have your report ready? 10 days, Prescott said. Thank you, she said. That evening, May set supper on the table, with a look that meant she had been paying attention to the quality of the air in the house all week, and had drawn conclusions, which was accurate because May paid attention to everything in the same thorough and unacknowledged way that Clara did, and the two of them had developed in the 10 days since Clara's arrival. The kind of silent mutual recognition that happens between people who have the same quality of observation and are both too practical to make a ceremony of having identified it in each other. Prescott said someone dug it, May said as she sat down. He did, Clara said. So it's real. It was always real, Clara said. Now it's confirmed. Eli looked up from his plate. Does that mean we get the water back? It means we've proven we were entitled to it in the first place, Clara said. Getting it back is the next step. How many steps are there? As many as it takes, Nathan said from the head of the table, and there was something in his voice that was different from the first night. Not warmer exactly. Nathan Cole was not a warm man in any conventional sense, but steadier. The steadiness of someone who has stopped carrying something alone and has not yet finished adjusting to the difference. Eli seemed to accept this. He went back to his food, chewed thoughtfully, and said, I told Jimmy Beaumont at school today that we had a surveyor out. Everyone at the table looked at him. Eli, Nathan said. He started it, Eli said with the precision of a boy who understood that sequence of events mattered in these situations. He said his father said our ranch was going to go under and we'd have to leave. So I told him we had a surveyor and we found where the creek went. The table was quiet. What did Jimmy say? May asked. He went kind of white, Eli said with the frank observational accuracy of a child who had not yet learned to soften what he noticed. And then he didn't say anything else. Clara looked at her plate. She was not going to smile in front of the children about this, because it was not something to encourage tactically a child antagonizing another child about an adult legal dispute. She also was in the privacy of her own expression, completely unable not to. Nathan caught her eye across the table, and the edge of his mouth moved in the way she had learned meant he was having exactly the same struggle. Don't do it again, Nathan told Eli. Yes, sir, Eli said in a tone that was technically compliant. It was the first time Clara thought that she had sat at a dinner table and felt like she was at the right one. It was a small and specific feeling, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that you notice only because you have gone long enough without it that the presence of it is remarkable. She noticed it. She let herself notice it. And then she picked up her fork and finished her supper and began in the back of her mind to plan the next step. Prescott's report arrived in 9 days, not 10. It was 42 pages of professional survey findings, and it confirmed every material point of Clara's analysis, and it added 3 things she had not found. A second modified embankment further east. Evidence of a supplemental drainage channel that had been added in 1886 to reinforce the original diversion, and a note that the modification was not only unauthorized, but had been deliberately concealed under a layer of planted vegetation that had since naturalized, but was identifiable to a trained surveyor's eye as non-native to the original creek bank. Deliberately concealed. Clara read that phrase twice. Then she went to find Nathan. He was in the barn when she walked in with the report in her hand, and he looked at her face and put down what he was doing. What is it? He said. She handed him the report open to page 11. She watched him read it. She watched him read it again. Deliberately concealed, he said. Yes. That's not negligence, Nathan said. That's not a misfiling or a mistake, or someone who didn't understand the notification requirement. No, Clara said. That is someone who knew exactly what they were doing and took active steps to make sure it wasn't found. Nathan set the report down on the workbench and stood with his hands flat on it and breathed. She gave him the moment he needed because the difference between what you suspected and what you have confirmed in 42 professionally certified pages is a real difference, and it lands in a person's body differently than it lands in their head. Then he looked up. Caldwell told the water board we should commission a professional survey, Nathan said. He did, Clara said. He didn't know what it would find. He thought he did, Clara said. He thought it would find nothing actionable, or he thought they'd have enough time to manage the situation before a report arrived. He did not anticipate. She paused. He did not anticipate that someone had already read the records closely enough to know exactly what the survey would confirm. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "We need to take this to the water board immediately," Clara said. "And I think we need to take it to a county attorney. If we go to the county attorney, this becomes a formal legal proceeding." "Yes," she said. "It does. Beaumont will come at us with everything he has." "He'll try," Clara said. "But he's going to come at us with a lawyer and a story. We're going to show up with a 42-page professional survey and 6 years of county records." She met his eyes. "Evidence beats a story, Nathan. Every time, if you have enough of it and you present it clearly." He looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to make it personal," Nathan said. "He's going to make it about you, who you are, where you came from, what you know and don't know. He's going to stand in front of this town and tell them they can't trust the woman who found this because of what she is." "I know," Clara said. And I've been underestimated before," she said. "By men with considerably more resources and considerably better lawyers. And I'm still here." She picked up the report. "And the survey is 42 pages long." Nathan looked at her, and what was in his face in that moment was not the careful assessment of the first night, not the deliberate updating of the fence line, not even the unguarded honesty of the water marker at sunset. What was in his face was something simpler and more complete than any of those things. The look of a man who has found something he did not know he was looking for and is not yet sure what to do about the finding. Clara held his gaze for exactly as long as was true, and then she said, "We should go in the morning. First thing." "First thing?" Nathan agreed. She walked back to the house with the report under her arm and the Wyoming evening coming down around her, and she thought about Harlan Beaumont and his Cheyenne lawyer and his 6 years of making people feel like they owed him something. She thought about the 42 pages in her hand. She thought about a court, a county attorney, a formal proceeding, the long and grinding machinery of a legal case against a wealthy and connected man. She was not afraid. What she felt walking toward the house where a lamp was already burning in the kitchen window, and May was probably already doing tomorrow's school reading, and Eli was probably doing anything except tomorrow's school reading. What she felt was the particular quality of readiness that comes when you have been moving toward something for a long time, and you have finally arrived at the point where the real work begins. She pushed open the door. The lamp burned on the table. She sat down and opened the report to page 1 and started making notes for the morning. The county attorney's name was James Aldridge, and he had the careful, measured manner of a man who had spent 20 years watching people come through his door, convinced they had a case, and leaving with a considerably more nuanced understanding of what a case actually required. He read Prescott's report in its entirety, while Nathan and Clara sat across from his desk, which took 31 minutes, and during those 31 minutes, he did not say a word, which Clara took as a good sign. Lawyers who talked while they read were lawyers who were performing attention rather than paying it. When he finished, he set the report down and looked at Clara. "You compiled the original documentary analysis," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Before the survey was commissioned." "Yes." "And the survey confirmed your findings?" "Every material point. And added 3 evidentiary elements I hadn't identified: the second embankment modification, the supplemental drainage channel added in 1886, and the deliberate concealment evidence." Aldridge looked at the report again, at the page with the concealment notation. "Deliberately concealed," he said in the same tone that Clara had used when she first read it, the tone of a person encountering a phrase that changes the nature of what they are looking at. "That phrase is the surveyor's professional assessment," Clara said. "Not mine. I understand whose assessment it is." Aldridge leaned back. "Mr. Cole, what you have here, if the survey findings hold under examination, and I believe they will, is not a civil water rights dispute. What you have is evidence of deliberate, sustained fraud against your property. The unauthorized diversion is a civil matter. The concealment is potentially criminal." Nathan was very still. Criminal. Filing a false improvement report, with the county actively concealing the nature of modifications that affect a neighboring property's legal rights, and maintaining that concealment over a 6-year period, while the affected property suffered documented financial harm, yes, that is not a misfiling, that is fraud. Clara had known this was coming, had seen the shape of it in the documents, the way you see the shape of a storm system moving across a ridge. But hearing it said plainly by a county attorney in a formal office made it land differently than it had in her own analysis. She felt Nathan feel it. Beside her, felt the particular quality of stillness that meant he was absorbing something large. "I need to ask you something directly," Aldridge said, looking at Nathan. "Harlan Beaumont is a significant figure in this county. He has legal resources, community relationships, and a lawyer who I know personally and who is very good at his job. If we file a formal complaint, this will become a protracted proceeding. It will cost money you may not have readily available. It will require you and Miss Whitfield to be witnesses, which means Beaumont's attorney will have the opportunity to challenge your credibility, your history, your motives in a public proceeding." He paused. "Are you prepared for that?" "I've been losing this ranch by inches for 6 years," Nathan said. "I'm prepared for whatever comes with stopping it." Aldridge looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Caldwell will specifically target you. Your background, your arrangement with Mr. Cole, your credentials. He will attempt to establish that your findings are motivated by personal interest rather than evidence. My findings are documented in a 42-page professional survey conducted by a man I had never met before this week," Clara said. "My personal interest doesn't change what Prescott measured, and I've been managing land records since I was 22 years old. Mr. Caldwell is welcome to examine my background." She met Aldridge's gaze. "He'll find a woman who knows what she's talking about. That's a problem for him, not for me." Aldridge looked at them both for a moment. Then he said, "All right, let's talk about how we file." They were in that office for 2 hours, and by the time they left, 3 things had been set in motion that could not be unset. A formal water rights complaint had been filed with the territorial court. A fraud referral had been sent to the county sheriff. And Harlan Beaumont had been served notice through Caldwell that the Cole Ranch was initiating formal legal proceedings against the Beaumont parcel for unauthorized water diversion property fraud and financial damages. The notice would reach Caldwell before noon. Clara knew what would come next, and it came before supper. She was at the kitchen table working through Nathan's financial records, calculating 6 years of estimated losses attributable to the reduced water access. A number the attorney had asked her to assemble for the damages portion of the claim, when May came in from the yard, moving fast enough that Clara put her pencil down before May said a word. "2 men rode in," May said. "They're at the gate. They're not from here. I don't know them. They asked for Nathan." Nathan came in from the barn 30 seconds later, because May had clearly gone to him first. He went to the and looked out, and his jaw set in the specific way it set when he was thinking rather than reacting, which Clara had learned to read as more serious than the alternative. "Caldwell's men," he said. "What do they want?" May asked. "To talk," Nathan said in a tone that made clear what kind of talking he expected. "Then I'll come with you," Clara said, and stood up. He looked at her. Not to argue. He was past that. "All right," he said. The 2 men at the gate were not Caldwell. They were the kind of men Caldwell sent when he wanted a message delivered that he preferred not to have attached to his name. One was older, gray-haired, with the manner of someone accustomed to being listened to. The other was younger and said nothing, and was there for a reason that was not conversation. The older one nodded at Nathan. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Beaumont wanted you to know that he considers this morning's filing an unfortunate escalation." "Does he?" Nathan said. "He wanted you to know he's prepared to discuss a settlement, a fair compensation for any inconvenience the water situation may have caused, and a formal acknowledgement of the water situation," Clara said. The man looked at her with the particular blankness of someone who has been told to speak to the man and is recalibrating to the presence of the woman. "That's what you called it?" Clara said pleasantly. "The water situation, the unauthorized diversion and deliberate concealment of fraudulent county filings that has caused 6 years of documented financial harm to this ranch. That situation." "Miss Whitfield," she said. "Clara Whitfield. You can tell Mr. Beaumont and Mr. Caldwell that the Cole Ranch is not interested in a settlement that begins with the word inconvenience." She held the man's gaze without difficulty. "What we have is a 42-page survey report, 6 years of county records, a professional surveyor's testimony, and a county attorney who has filed formal complaints in 3 separate jurisdictions this morning. What Mr. Beaumont has is a fraudulent improvement filing and a concealment that Prescott identified in 9 days of professional survey work. She paused. Tell him we'll see him in court. The man looked at Nathan. Nathan said, You heard her. They rode away. May, who had watched from the porch in defiance of being told to go inside, came down the steps when the gate closed and said, You told them we'd see them in court. We will, Clara said. Do we have enough money to go to court? Nathan and Clara looked at each other. We're working on that, Nathan said. What they were working on specifically was the question that had kept Clara at the financial records until late the previous 2 nights. The question of whether the ranch's current resources could sustain a legal proceeding against a man with Beaumont's financial capacity, and the answer at its most honest was not easily. The legal fees alone would strain what Nathan had. A drawn-out proceeding which Caldwell would ensure it was because delay was a weapon that favored the party. With more resources could be ruinous in a different way than the lost water had been slower and more visible. She had been thinking about this problem from 3 different angles for 2 days, and she had arrived at a partial answer that she had not yet raised with Nathan because she was still deciding whether it was a reasonable thing to ask. That evening after supper, after the children were in bed, she raised it. I want to go see Martha Granger, she said. Nathan looked up from the accounts he'd been reviewing. About what? About the water board and the pattern of affected properties. She set her pencil down. We are not the only ranch that has lost ground to Beaumont's expansion. We are the most documented case. But if there are other properties that have experienced similar issues, water access changes, livestock condition problems, records that don't match the ground, then we are not a single plaintiff. We are the visible end of a pattern. And a pattern is considerably harder to dismiss than one family's complaint. Nathan was quiet. You think there are others. I think a man who was willing to do what he did to this ranch was not doing it for the first time. Clara said. And I think he was not planning for it to be the last time. The supplemental drainage channel he added in 1886, 2 years after the original diversion, was not maintenance. It was expansion. He was securing the modification. She looked at Nathan. He was planning to stay, and he was planning to grow, which means other property lines were in his sights. Nathan sat with that for a moment. If there are other affected ranches, then the legal proceeding changes shape entirely, Clara said. We are no longer one family against a wealthy neighbor. We are a community bringing a documented pattern of fraud to a territorial court. And communities have resources that individual families don't. Martha would know who to talk to, Nathan said slowly. Yes, and the water board has standing to investigate in a way that an individual complaint doesn't. If Martha can identify other affected properties and bring them to the board can expand the investigation formally. She paused. It takes Caldwell's delay strategy away from him. He can draw out one complaint. He cannot easily draw out a board investigation of multiple documented cases. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. When did you work this out? Last night, she said. And the night before? While you were doing the financial records. The financial records took 2 hours. I had time left. He was quiet. He was doing the thing she had learned was him deciding to say something he had been thinking for longer than the current conversation. Clara, he said. Yes. I want to ask you something. All right. He looked at his hands on the table and then at her. This arrangement we have, the practical arrangement. He stopped. Yes, she said carefully. Is it? He stopped again, started differently. Is this what you want? Not the ranch, not the legal case, not the work. I know you want those things, and I know you're good at them. I'm asking about... He paused. About the rest of it. May, Eli. This house. Me. He said the last word with the deliberate, undefended quality of a man who has decided that accuracy matters more than protection. Is this a place you want to be, or is this the best available option, and you're making the most of it? Clara was quiet for the moment. She thought about how to answer honestly, which was the only way she knew how to answer things that mattered. When I left Wichita, she said. "I was making a practical decision. I was choosing the best available door. That's true." She met his eyes. "But I have been in practical arrangements before, Nathan. My father's house was a practical arrangement. The boarding house was a practical arrangement. And neither of them felt like anything except a place where I was temporarily permitted to exist." She paused. "This feels different." "How?" "Because you asked," she said simply. "Because you keep asking. Because May trusts me with things she doesn't say out loud. And Eli showed up at the back of that meeting room when he was supposed to be at the neighbors because he wanted to see if I was going to be all right." She held his gaze. "And because you came down those porch steps in the rain instead of waiting for me to come to you. It's a small thing. But small things tell you the real story." Nathan looked at her. "I want to be here," she said. "Not because it's the best available option, because it's where I actually want to be." She paused. "Is that clear enough?" "Yes," he said. "That's clear enough." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers briefly, the way he did most things without ceremony, with complete intention, and then he sat back and said, "We'll go see Martha in the morning." Clara breathed. "Yes," she said. "In the morning." Martha Granger listened to Clara's theory about the pattern of affected properties with the specific quality of attention that meant she was running it against everything she already knew while Clara was still talking. When Clara finished, Martha was quiet for perhaps 10 seconds, which from Martha was the equivalent of a lengthy deliberation. "Tom Birch," Martha said. "What Nathan said. Tom Birch on the Eastern Ridge. He sold out to Beaumont 2 years ago. Said his cattle operation had become unviable water access issues, he called it. I thought it was the dry year." She paused. "And the Halsey widow. Her husband died in '85, and she sold the northern quarter of her property to Beaumont the following spring. She said the north quarter wasn't productive anymore." Martha looked at Clara. "That's 2 in 6 years that I can think of immediately. 2 properties that bordered Beaumont's parcel and experienced water access problems that led to them selling land to Beaumont," Clara said. "At what price?" Martha's expression shifted into something specific and hard. "Below value, both of them. Tom Birch told me he got less than he expected, but he needed the money, and Beaumont was the only buyer willing to move quickly." She paused. "Because no one else knew what the property was actually worth. Because everyone thought the water issue was natural. Because the filing said it was a farming improvement," Clara said. "Not a deliberate diversion." The 3 of them sat with that. "He bought 2 properties at reduced value because he had made them less valuable first," Nathan said. "And then he was moving on mine." "Your property is larger than either of the others," Clara said. "And your water rights are older and more established. You would have been the significant acquisition. But you didn't sell. Because you kept trying to find out what was wrong, instead of accepting that something simply was." Nathan looked at her. "Because my father told me something was wrong." "Yes," she said. "And because you listened to him even when you didn't fully understand what he meant. That's what stopped it." Martha stood up. "I'm calling an emergency water board session. I'm requesting that Tom Birch and the Halsey widow, her name is Eleanor Halsey, be contacted and asked to provide any documentation they have from the period before their sales." She was already moving toward her writing desk. "If their records show the same pattern you found in Nathan's, then we have 3 affected properties and a documented pattern of deliberate manipulation," Clara said. "Then we have considerably more than one family's complaint," Martha said, and the satisfaction in her voice was the specific iron satisfaction of a woman who has been watching something be wrong for years and has finally found the evidence to call it what it is. Tom Birch came to the water board session 4 days later with his records in a cardboard box and the manner of a man who had been carrying something heavy and unidentified for 2 years and was only now beginning to understand what it was. He was in his 60s, lean and weathered, and he shook Clara's hand when Nathan introduced them and said, "Nathan tells me you're the one who found the creek records." "I found the pattern," Clara said. "Your records will tell us if it's the same one." It was the same one. Birch's records were less complete than Nathan's father's. Robert Cole had been an unusually meticulous keeper of documents, but there was enough. The seasonal flow measurements from before 1884 showed reliable water access. The measurements from after the ones Birch had made himself in the increasingly confused years when his operation was failing showed consistent decline. And in his correspondence files, Clara found something that made her go very still at the table in Martha's sitting room where she was reviewing the documents. A letter, dated spring of 1885, from Harlan Beaumont to Tom Birch. Friendly in tone, neighborly, the language of a man offering a hand to someone in difficulty. Expressing sympathy about the water troubles on the eastern section. Offering to purchase the affected quarter at what he called a fair price given the circumstances. And including in the third paragraph a sentence that Clara read 4 times before she showed it to Nathan. I understand the eastern water access has been particularly unreliable these past seasons, and I expect that trend will continue, given the natural drainage changes we've seen across the ridge. Natural drainage changes. He had written it. In his own hand. In a letter that had been sitting in Tom Birch's correspondence file for 2 years. He told Birch it was natural, Nathan said, reading over her shoulder. While knowing it wasn't, Clara said. While having been the one to make it happen. She looked at the letter for a long moment. This is the fraud, she said. Not just the filing. This letter. He used the consequence of his own deliberate action to encourage Birch to sell while describing that action as natural. That is not a property dispute. That is targeted financial manipulation. She picked up the letter and took it directly to Aldridge's office that afternoon and put it on his desk without preamble and said, "This changes the scope of the proceeding." Aldridge read it. He read it twice. He set it down with the precise care of a man handling something that has just become significantly more important than it was a minute ago. "Where did you find this?" he said. Tom Birch's correspondence file, Clara said. He had no idea what it meant. "It means," Aldridge said slowly, "that Harlan Beaumont knew the drainage changes were not natural at the time. He wrote this letter because he caused them, and he described them as natural, to induce a neighboring property owner to sell at a reduced price." He looked up. "That is fraud in the inducement of a property transaction. That carries significantly different penalties than a water rights violation." "I know," Clara said. "This is a serious letter, Miss Whitfield." "Yes," she said. "It is." Aldridge was quiet for a moment. "The Halsey widow Eleanor. Has anyone reviewed her correspondence?" Clara looked at him steadily. "I'm going tomorrow." She found Eleanor Halsey's letter the following afternoon. It was nearly identical in structure to the one Birch had received. The same friendly tone, the same sympathy about the unreliable water, the same phrase, natural drainage changes, used to describe the destruction of a woman's livelihood by the man who had engineered it. Eleanor Halsey was 63 years old and had been living in town since selling her land, and she sat at her kitchen table while Clara read the letter and said nothing for a long time after Clara set it down. Then she said, "He told me it was the land, that the North Quarter had always been unreliable, and I just hadn't noticed because my husband had managed it and he'd known how to work around it." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "He said some land just fails. He said I should take his offer before it got worse." "He caused it," Clara said quietly. "He moved the water, and then he told you it was natural." Eleanor looked at the letter. "I sold that quarter for $800, she said. "My husband paid 4 times that for it in 1879. "I know," Clara said. "I looked up the original deed." "Can I get it back?" Eleanor's voice was very controlled. "The land, can I get it back?" Clara looked at her honestly. "I don't know," she said. "That will depend on the court and on what remedy is available. What I can tell you is that you have a letter in Beaumont's own handwriting describing the damage he caused as natural, and that letter along with the survey report and the county records and 3 sets of affected property documentation is going to be presented to a territorial court." She paused. "I cannot promise you what the court will decide. I can promise you that what was done to you and to Nathan Cole and to Tom Birch is documented, and that the documentation is going to be seen." Eleanor Halsey straightened in her chair. Something changed in her face, not dramatically, but definitively. The particular change that comes to a person when they understand that what happened to them has a name and a cause, and is no longer simply the inexplicable failure that they have been carrying as their own. "What do you need from me?" she said. "The letter," Clara said. "And your testimony if it comes to that." "You'll have both," Eleanor said. Clara walked back to the Cole Ranch that evening with 3 letters in Beaumont's own handwriting, the original county filing the letter to Birch, the letter to Eleanor and Prescott's 42-page survey report, and 6 years of Nathan's records, and Tom Birch's records, and Eleanor Halsey's records, and she understood with the clear-eyed certainty that she trusted when it came to her that what they had now was not a complaint. What they had now was a case. The formal hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Caldwell filed 2 motions to delay it. Aldridge opposed both. The territorial judge, a man named Fenton, who had been hearing cases in Wyoming for 15 years, denied both motions in language that Clara. When Aldridge showed her the rulings read twice, and then said, "He's seen cases like this before." "He has," Aldridge confirmed. "He knows what a delay motion is when the other side has the evidence." The days between the motions and the hearing had a quality of suspended tension that Clara felt throughout the ranch, in how Nathan moved through his work, in how May watched the road when she thought no one was watching, in how Eli asked each evening at supper whether anything had happened today in a tone that meant he was hoping for yes. 3 days before the hearing, Caldwell made a move that none of them had anticipated. He came himself without the 2 men from before, without warning in the late morning when Nathan was at the fence line and Clara was at the kitchen table and May and Eli were at school. He knocked on the front door with the brisk, neutral knock of a man conducting business. Clara opened it. Caldwell looked at her with the practiced pleasantness that had not changed since the water board meeting and said, "Miss Whitfield, I was hoping to speak with Mr. Cole." "He's not here," Clara said. "You can speak with me." Caldwell considered this for exactly long enough to make clear that he was deciding whether to accept it. Then, "May I come in?" "No," Clara said. "We can speak here." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his manner. "Very well. Mr. Beaumont is prepared to offer a full settlement of the water rights claim, including compensation for documented losses over the 6-year period in exchange for withdrawal of the fraud complaint and a sealed agreement." He paused. "It is a generous offer, Miss Whitfield. Considerably more than you would likely receive after the cost and duration of a formal proceeding." Clara looked at him steadily. "What number?" Caldwell told her. It was, she had to admit, a significant number. It would restore the ranch's financial position. It would pay off the accumulated debt. It would leave Nathan Cole in a stable position for several years without the uncertainty of a legal proceeding. She understood why Beaumont had sent Caldwell now 3 days before the hearing instead of waiting. He had read the evidence. He knew what 3 letters in his own handwriting said. He was trying to end it before a territorial judge read them too. "No," Clara said. Caldwell blinked. "Miss Whitfield, Tom Birch sold land worth $4,000 for $800 because your client told him the damage was natural while knowing he had caused it," Clara said. "Eleanor Halsey sold the quarter her husband built his operation around because your client described his own fraud as a natural drainage change. The compensation in your offer doesn't account for Birch's losses or Halsey's losses." She held his gaze. "We are not the only people in this case, Mr. Caldwell. We never were." Caldwell was very still. "They are not named in the current complaint." "They will be," Clara said. "Aldridge filed the amended complaint this morning." She watched Caldwell process that. She watched him understand that the conversation he had come here to have was not the conversation he was now having. "The sealed agreement," he said. "If this goes to a public hearing." "It will be public," Clara said. "The fraud filing the letters, the survey the pattern across 3 properties. All of it will be public record." She looked at him with the clarity of someone who has carried something a long way and set it down in exactly the right place. "Tell Mr. Beaumont that what he built in 6 years of careful hidden manipulation has been found. All of it. And the people of Red Willow are going to hear about every piece of it." She paused. "Unless he would like to make a full accounting to the court himself, which might be worth something to a judge." but that is his decision to make. Not mine. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. The pleasantness was still on his face, but it had become effortful in a way it hadn't been at the water board meeting. You understand, he said, that this proceeding will be difficult for you personally. Yes, Clara said. That I will have to challenge your credibility, your background, your standing. Yes, she said. I understand that. And you're prepared for that. Mr. Caldwell, Clara said. I walked 2 miles in a Wyoming rainstorm with a broken suitcase to get to this ranch. I presented those documents to a water board while your client called me a mail-order bride who didn't know what she was looking at. I found 3 letters in your client's own handwriting that describe his fraud in his own words. She met his eyes. I am prepared for whatever you bring. Bring it. Caldwell left. Nathan was coming up the drive when Caldwell rode out, and he stopped and watched the lawyer go, and then looked at Clara on the porch. What did he want? Nathan said. Settlement, Clara said. We declined. We, Nathan said. It was not a question, it was a recognition. We, Clara confirmed. Nathan came up the porch steps and stood beside her and looked out at the road where Caldwell had gone, and then he looked at her profile and she could feel his looking. The way you feel the specific weight of someone's full attention. Clara, he said. Yes. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she said. They stood on the porch together in the quiet of the Wyoming morning, and Clara thought about all the distances she had traveled to stand in this particular place, the 900 miles on the train, the 2 miles in the rain, the distance across 3 years of invisibility, the distance across 10 days, and a water board meeting, and a county attorney's office, and Tom Birch's correspondence file, and Eleanor Halsey's kitchen table. She thought about how distance is not measured in miles. She thought about how the hardest distance she had ever traveled was the one between asking for a place to sleep and believing she was worth one. She was on the other side of it now. The hearing was in 3 days. She was ready. The morning of the hearing, Clara was up before anyone else in the house. She did not sleep well the night before, which she had expected and had not fought. She had learned long ago that there was no useful way to force sleep the night before, something that mattered, and that the energy spent trying was better conserved for the morning. She lay in the dark and went through the documents in her mind. Instead, not anxiously, not rehearsing worry, but the way a carpenter runs a hand along a joint to confirm it before the client comes to inspect it. Every piece, every connection, every place where Caldwell might find an edge, and what she would say when he did. By the time she had run through it twice, she was satisfied, and by the time she was satisfied, the sky outside had begun its slow shift from black to the particular dark blue that precedes dawn in Wyoming, and she got up. She was dressed and had the coffee on, and the documents stacked and ordered on the kitchen table when Nathan came in from checking the animals. He looked at her and at the documents and at the coffee, and he said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you been up?" "A while," she said. He poured himself a cup and stood at the counter and looked at her with the directness she had come to rely on. The way you rely on a fixed point when everything around it is moving. "You ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You're not." He stopped. Started again. "You slept." "Not much," she said honestly. "But I've done that before. I'm clear. That's what matters." He nodded once. The nod of a man who trusts what he is told when the person telling him has earned that trust. May came down 20 minutes later in her good dress, which she had put on without being asked, and Eli came down in his good shirt with his hair damp and combed, which Clara suspected had not been his initiative, and the 4 of them ate breakfast together in a quiet that was not tense, but simply full of the weight of what the day was full of what each of them was carrying into it. Eli broke it, as Eli generally did. "Are you going to make him look stupid?" he asked Clara, addressing his eggs with studied casualness. "Eli," Nathan said. "I'm going to present the evidence," Clara said. "What it makes him look like is his own business." Eli considered this. "But the evidence is pretty bad for him." "It is," Clara agreed. Eli nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed what they already believed and picked up his fork and went back to his eggs. The territorial courtroom in Red Willow was the largest room in the county building, which meant it held 60 people comfortably and approximately 90 people uncomfortably. And when Clara walked in behind Nathan and Aldridge, it held something considerably closer to the latter. She had not anticipated this. She had understood the hearing would be public, had understood that the events of the past 3 weeks had moved through the town the way water moves through dry ground, fast and deep, finding every available channel. But the physical presence of that many people in a room that was already warm and close was something different from understanding it abstractly. She stood at the plaintiff's table and did not look at the crowd. She looked at her documents. She arranged them once, confirmed the order, and then looked at the judge's bench and waited. Judge Fenton was a compact man in his 60s, with the economical manner of someone who had spent too many years in courtrooms that wasted his time to have any patience left for waste. He called the room to order with 2 strikes of his gavel, read the matter into the record in 3 sentences, and looked at Aldridge. "You've added parties to the complaint," he said. "We have, Your Honor. Tom Birch and Eleanor Halsey have joined as co-plaintiffs based on documentary evidence of the same pattern of fraud affecting their properties." Fenton looked at Caldwell. "You received the amended complaint." "We did, Your Honor," Caldwell said with a pleasantness that had become somewhat mechanical. "We object to the addition on grounds of—" "I've read your objection," Fenton said. "Denied. We proceed on the amended complaint." He looked at Aldridge. "You may present." Aldridge presented for 40 minutes. He was methodical and unhurried, and he used Clara's analysis as the structural framework of the entire presentation, which she had not known he intended, and which moved her in a way she kept carefully off her face. He put the documents before the court, one by one. The original flow. Records, the modification, filing the survey report, the Birch letter, the Halsey letter, and he read the key phrases aloud with the flat precision of a man who understands that plain language does more damage than rhetoric. When the plain language says what these documents said, natural drainage changes. He read from Beaumont's letter to Birch. Natural drainage changes, as he read again from the letter to Eleanor Halsey. And then he read from Prescott's survey report, the section on the second embankment. The modification bears clear evidence of deliberate engineering, inconsistent with natural water course variance. He let the 2 phrases sit side by side in the room's air. Then he said, "The plaintiff will now call its primary analytical witness." Fenton looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield, you compiled the original documentary analysis that formed the basis of this complaint." Clara stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "You may be seated. Mr. Aldridge, proceed." What followed was 40 minutes of examination that Clara had prepared for, and felt prepared for, and that was still in the actual execution of it. Different from the preparation, because preparation happens in a quiet room with documents and reason and examination. Happens in a room full of 60 people watching you and one skilled lawyer on the other side, waiting for the moment when you give him something he can use. Aldridge asked her to walk the court through her findings methodically, and she did the way she had walked Nathan through them in the clerk's office and the water board through them in the town hall. But cleaner still now, stripped to the essential structure, because she had presented this material enough times to know exactly where the weight was and exactly where people needed a moment to let it settle. She was halfway through the Birch letter analysis when Caldwell's first objection came. "Your Honor, the witness is offering interpretive analysis of a document that speaks for itself." Fenton looked at Clara. "Do you agree the document speaks for itself, Miss Whitfield?" "Yes, Your Honor," Clara said. "It says natural drainage changes in Mr. Beaumont's own handwriting. The survey report says deliberate engineering in Prescott's professional assessment. I'm not interpreting either of them. I'm noting that they contradict each other, and that one is the account of the man who caused the modification, and the other is the account of the man who measured it." Fenton looked at Caldwell. Objection overruled. Caldwell rose for cross-examination with the pleasant, unbothered manner that Clara had catalogued from the water board meeting and from her porch 3 days ago, and she understood that the pleasantness was armor and strategy. Both it was designed to make her feel that she was the one being unreasonable if she pushed back with any force. She had no intention of pushing back with force. She had no intention of pushing back at all. She intended to answer every question he asked with the same level precision she had used with Aldridge, because precision did not require force, and against a well-documented case. Precision was the sharpest thing in the room. "Miss Whitfield," Caldwell said, "you arrived in Red Willow approximately 4 weeks ago." "Yes. You had no prior knowledge of Nathan Cole, his ranch, this community, or the parties involved." "Correct. And in the space of 3 days, you conducted an analysis that led to a formal complaint against one of the county's most established ranchers." "In the space of 3 days, I reviewed existing county records," Clara said. "The records were there before I arrived. I read them." Caldwell moved on. "You have no professional credentials as a surveyor, hydrologist, or attorney." "Correct. No formal training in water rights law." "I have practical experience in water rights documentation from 6 years of managing land records for a 700-acre agricultural operation," Clara said. "That experience informed my reading of the county records. The survey itself was conducted by Prescott, who has the professional credentials you're referencing." "But you directed the survey." "I identified the discrepancy that made a survey necessary," she said. "Prescott conducted the survey independently. His findings are his professional assessment, not mine." Caldwell shifted. "Miss Whitfield, your arrangement with Nathan Cole is a business arrangement," Clara said. "A matrimonial arrangement." "A business arrangement," she said again evenly. "One in which I provide household management and agricultural record-keeping in exchange for room board and compensation. That arrangement existed before I found the discrepancy in the records. It did not motivate the finding. The finding motivated itself. You stand to benefit financially if this case succeeds." "Every plaintiff stands to benefit financially if a case succeeds," Clara said. "That is the nature of a damages claim. It does not make the documentary evidence less factual." Caldwell paused. She recognized the pause. It was the pause of a lawyer who has run through the angles he prepared and is deciding in real time whether to go somewhere he didn't plan, which meant she had not given him the opening he expected. He went somewhere he hadn't planned. "Your late husband," he said, "Thomas Whitfield. His estate left you with significant debt." The room shifted. She felt it, the collective drawing of breath that meant people understood he was going somewhere personal. She did not react to the shift. She let it happen around her and kept her eyes on Caldwell. "Yes," she said. "And you subsequently found yourself in a boarding house in Wichita, unable to meet your rent." "Yes. And you placed a notice in a matrimonial register as a result of that financial difficulty." "I placed a notice in a matrimonial register because I had skills relevant to a working agricultural operation, and I needed a situation that would allow me to use them," Clara said. "The financial difficulty was the circumstance. The skills were the substance." "But the financial difficulty existed." "Yes," she said. "It did. Is that relevant to the water records?" Caldwell looked at her. "I'm asking sincerely," Clara said. "I want to understand which part of my financial difficulty in Wichita affects the accuracy of the 1884 modification filing." The room made a sound. Not a laugh exactly. Something quieter and more considered than a laugh. The sound of 60 people simultaneously recognizing that the question was both entirely reasonable and entirely devastating to the line of questioning that had produced it. Fenton said nothing. But his expression, which had been neutral throughout, moved precisely 1 degree in a direction that was not unfavorable. Caldwell withdrew the line of questioning. He tried 2 more angles. Clara answered both with the same level precision, and neither produced the opening he was looking for, and after the second one he said, "No further questions." With the smooth finality of a man concluding something on his own terms, who is in fact concluding it on someone else's, Aldridge stood. "The plaintiffs rest your honor." Then came the moment that Clara had not anticipated. Not Caldwell's presentation. Not Beaumont on the stand, which was managed and careful and added nothing to the record that the documents hadn't already established. Not the rebuttal. What Clara had not anticipated was what happened at the lunch recess in the corridor outside the courtroom when Eleanor Halsey found her. Eleanor was 63 years old, and she had the particular dignity of a woman who has survived a great deal and has decided that survival is not enough, that there is a difference between surviving something and refusing to let it define you. She had testified that morning with a steadiness that had clearly surprised Caldwell, who had expected Clara thought someone more easily shaken. Eleanor found Clara in the corridor and took her hand in both of hers and held it. "My husband built that quarter section," Eleanor said. "He spent 8 years building it. He died believing it had failed. He died thinking something he had done, some error he had made it unviable." Her voice was controlled, but it was controlled with effort. "He didn't fail it. Beaumont took it from under him. And my husband went to his grave not knowing that." Clara held her hand and did not try to fill the silence with anything, because Eleanor was not asking for comfort. She was asking for witness. "He'll know now," Clara said quietly. "What happened to it will be in the public record. Everyone who wants to know the truth of it can find it. That's yours, and it's his." Eleanor straightened. Her grip tightened for just a moment and then released. "Thank you," she said, "for finding it." "I just read the records," Clara said. "You read what no one else bothered to," Eleanor said, with the firmness of someone correcting an insufficient account of events. "That's not nothing. That's everything." She walked back into the courtroom, and Clara stood in the corridor for a moment, with her hand still feeling the warmth of Eleanor's grip, and she thought about all the people who had read the small version of her, and how none of them had been right, and how Eleanor Halsey's husband had gone to his grave carrying a failure that was never his, and how it had taken one woman reading the county records for the truth of it to have a chance at seeing daylight. She walked back into the courtroom. Judge Fenton's ruling came at the end of the afternoon session. He did not deliberate long. Clara had noticed over the course of the day that Fenton was a judge who made his decisions as the evidence arrived and spent his deliberation time on language rather than conclusion, which meant that when he spoke, he had already been certain for some time. "The court finds," Fenton said, in the even authoritative tone of a man for whom these words had weight precisely because he used them carefully, "that the 1884 modification filing by the Beaumont parcel was materially deficient, filed without the required notification to adjacent landowners, and constituted unauthorized interference with documented water rights belonging to the Cole property." The court further finds that the modification was not as represented in the filing and in the defendant's communications to affected parties, a natural drainage variance, but a deliberate engineered diversion, as established by the professional survey submitted into evidence. The room was perfectly still. The court finds sufficient evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation in the defendant's communications to Tom Birch and Eleanor Halsey to refer the matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal fraud assessment. That referral will be made today. He looked at Beaumont. "Mr. Beaumont, you will be hearing from the prosecutor's office." Beaumont's face had not changed in any observable way, but something behind it had gone very still in the way things go still when they are no longer what they were a moment ago. "Regarding remedy," Fenton continued, "the Cole Ranch is awarded full water rights restoration to be completed within 60 days at the defendant's expense and compensatory damages for 6 years of documented losses as calculated in the plaintiff's financial analysis." He looked at Aldridge. "Your analyst's numbers." "Clara Whitfield's analysis, Your Honor," Aldridge said. "Her numbers stand," Fenton said. "The Birch and Halsey claims for compensatory damages will be heard in a subsequent proceeding, which will be scheduled within 30 days. He struck his gavel once. "This court is adjourned." The room exhaled. And then it did something Clara had not expected. It began to talk, not the scattered, uncertain murmur of people processing something, but the purposeful, animated talk of a community that has had something confirmed, that it needed confirmed, that has watched something be made right, that needed to be made right. She heard Nathan's name, and her name, and Prescott's name, and Robert Cole's name, and she heard Tom Birch saying something she couldn't make out to Eleanor Halsey, and she heard from somewhere behind her a woman she didn't know say to another woman she didn't know she found it. She found the whole thing. That woman found it. Nathan was beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. The room was moving around them, and he stood beside her in the middle of it, the way he stood at fence lines, steady and purposeful, and entirely himself. Then he said very quietly, "My father's ranch." "Yes," Clara said. "It's going to be all right." "Yes," she said. "It is." He reached for her hand. Not the brief, deliberate touch across the kitchen table, but something fuller and less careful. the reach of a man who has finished being careful about this particular thing, and she let him take it and held it back with the same intention he had given it. Martha Granger passed them on her way out and put one hand briefly on Clara's arm and said nothing at all, which from Martha Granger was the highest possible form of acknowledgement. Tom Birch shook Clara's hand and said, "I want to buy you supper, both of you, tonight." He paused. "You gave me back something I thought was just gone." "You brought the records," Clara said. "You made it possible." "You knew what to do with them," Birch said simply. "That's the part I couldn't have done." The courthouse corridor filled, and then began to empty, and Beaumont left with Caldwell without looking at any of them, which Clara noted and thought about briefly, and then set aside as no longer her concern. What Beaumont faced now was the prosecutor's office, and a community that had seen the full shape of what he had built and had watched it named. That was the consequence of a deliberate thing, and consequences that belong to the person who earned them are not something she needed to carry. What she needed to carry was considerably lighter than what she had carried into Red Willow 4 weeks ago. The wagon ride home was quiet in the good way, the way that means everyone in it has enough to think about, that silence is the right container for it. May sat between Nathan and Clara on the wagon bench, which she had arranged by simply getting in first and sitting in the middle, in the manner of a 14-year-old who has decided something and is implementing that decision without making a speech about it. Eli was in the back, and he had fallen asleep before they reached the edge of town, because Eli approached all emotional expenditure with the thoroughness that required recovery. "Mrs. Halsey cried," May said about a mile from home. "I know," Clara said. "She lost her land." "She did, and the court will hear her damages claim next month. But she can't get it back, the land itself." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That's something the court will have to determine. Whether Beaumont can be required to return it, or whether the remedy is financial." She paused. "Some things can be restored to what they were. Some things have to be made into something new. The important thing is that what was taken is acknowledged, and that the person it was taken from is not left carrying the cost of someone else's wrong." May was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, "Is that what happened to you?" Clara looked at her. "Before you came here," May said. "People taking things, and you carrying the cost." The wagon moved. The Wyoming evening settled around them, enormous and quiet, and full of the particular gold light that this territory did better than anywhere else Clara had ever been. "Yes," Clara said. "Something like that." "And now," May said. Clara looked at Nathan's profile, and then out at the road ahead, and then at the outline of the ranch coming into view in the distance. The house, the barn, the fence lines that held the land together, the northern section where the water was going to come back in 60 days, the stone marker that said RC, 1875, standing in the grass where Robert Cole had put it to say, "This is mine, this is real, this is here." Now, Clara said, is different. May leaned slightly against her side, which she did with the casualness of someone who has decided a thing is normal and is implementing that decision as well. And Clara did not make anything of it, just let it be there, the small warm weight of it, the realness of it. They pulled up to the ranch as the last of the light was leaving the sky, and Nathan got down first and reached up, and Eli came awake in the back and tumbled out with the gracelessness of a boy, jolted from sleep, and May jumped down on her own. And Clara stepped down and stood in the yard of the Cole Ranch and looked at the house with the lamp already burning in the window, the way it burned every evening now, because she lit it before they left. Nathan came to stand beside her. "Stay," he said. Not the arrangement, not the practical terms, not the careful language of a business letter. Just the word. Just the intention behind it, plain and undefended and entirely his. Clara looked at the lamp in the window and the house that had become the right one, and the man standing beside her who had come down porch steps in the rain without making a ceremony of it, and who had asked what she knew before he assumed he already knew what she was. "I already am," she said. 3 months later, Dawson Creek crossed back onto coal land at 2 documented points, restored by court order, the water running clear and cold through the ground. It had been taken from finding the channels that the land still remembered, even after 6 years of absence. Clara stood at the northern fence and listened to it. Come back, and she did not need to say anything about it, and neither did Nathan, who stood beside her, with his shoulder against hers, in the quiet way he had developed of being close to her without requiring the proximity to be announced. Tom Birch's damages were awarded in full the following month. Eleanor Halsey's land was ordered returned by the territorial court in a ruling that Fenton wrote himself, and that Clara read 3 times because the language of it was, she thought, as close to justice as legal language ever got. Harlan Beaumont's fraud referral resulted in formal criminal charges that carried him out of Red Willow County and into a proceeding that would occupy his lawyers and his resources for the better part of 2 years. He did not return. His land was sold to settle his obligations, and the buyers were people from the community, people who knew the ground and intended to work it honestly. Red Willow changed in the way communities change when they discover that a thing they accepted as fixed was actually constructed, that what they thought was the natural order was someone's deliberate arrangement, and that arrangements can be rearranged by people willing to read the records and say what they find. It changed slowly and not completely, and in ways that were sometimes visible, and sometimes not, the way water changes ground, not all at once, but steadily finding every available channel, shaping the land it moves through into something that holds it. The worn suitcase stayed in the corner of Clara's room, which had ceased to be a room she had been given and had become a room that was hers. Nathan asked her once in the fall why she kept it, and she said it reminded her of the woman who thought she had nothing left. And Nathan said she was wrong about that, and Clara said yes she was, and that was the point. She had walked into Red Willow carrying everything she owned in a failing bag in the rain, with nothing to recommend her except what she knew and who she was. She had asked for one night's shelter and one chance to show what she could do. She had been given both. She had done the rest herself, not because someone discovered her worth and granted it to her. Because her worth had been there the whole time, waiting for the question that would let it out, and she had found the man and the place and the moment that finally asked it. The Cole Ranch stood on its restored ground, running the water that was always rightfully its own. Clara Cole. She had taken the name quietly in October in the Reverend's office with May and Eli and Martha Granger and Tom Birch as witnesses, and no ceremony. Beyond the one that mattered kept the books and the records and the knowledge that ran in her. Like water runs through ground, it knows deep and certain and entirely her own. She had not come with nothing. She had come with everything. And the woman who knew that now, who had always been that woman, even in the rain, even at the gate, even in the moment, she whispered, "Please, that woman."